Chapter 9:17. The sky was already bright, and the news of the defeat at the front had yet to reach them. Jiba City had already broken through the 4 gates, as usual. Some listless, gold-rimmed soldiers also walked towards the city gates, preparing for the day's work. Rumble. The earth suddenly trembled, causing the gold-rimmed soldiers who seemed to have not slept enough to look puzzled. Looking up at the sky, it was still clear, and there was no sign of heavy rain. Then where did the thunder come from? Until a soldier inadvertently looked ahead and saw countless black dots in the distance, rapidly approaching. He finally couldn't help but shout, "Look! What is that?" After a full 2 breaths of silence, a gold-rimmed soldier was the first to wake up and shouted, "It's the enemy! It's the cavalry! Quick! Close the city gates! Everyone retreat into the city." It was just that it was too late to think of retreating at this time, as the vanguard, the 1st Cavalry Regiment, Taimur, had already brought a group of brothers to the city gates. First, there was a long-range attack with bows and arrows. More than 10 soldiers guarding the north gate were killed by the arrows. The cavalry rushed into Jiba City like a torrent, unstoppable. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment will follow, and the 3rd Cavalry Regiment will be the last. Remember, after entering the city, close the 4 gates and prohibit anyone from entering or leaving. You must not let anyone go. Spread the news. Division Commander Tian, who rode on his horse and gave the military order. The later the footprints of the 1st Cavalry Division were known to the enemy, the more advantageous it would be for them. Tian, who knew that their advantage was that they were fast enough and their charge was fierce enough. For example, the musketeers still needed to stop and aim at the target when charging, but they didn't need to. They only needed to charge continuously and kill the enemy on the way. But they also had their own disadvantages, and that was once it involved siege warfare, their strength would be greatly restrained. How to take advantage of the enemy's unpreparedness and kill their way into the enemy's city became something that he needed to plan and consider. The cavalry entered the city, and along the way, anyone who blocked the way was cut in half by the cavalry's sword. This kind of charge that disregarded human lives quickly emptied the roads in the city to ensure that the cavalry could quickly run through the city without any restrictions. It was precisely because they were fast enough that the 2,000 defenders in Jiba City had not yet figured out what had happened. Even the soldiers who had asked for help did not have time to leave the city before they were firmly surrounded, and those who resisted were all killed. Occasionally, some commoners who had already left the city would be caught up by the cavalrymen. Those who refused to return to the city would naturally end up dead. 2 hours later, when it was almost noon, the situation in Jiba City was under control. The people stayed at home, and the surrendered soldiers were locked up in the barracks. The management of the entire city fell into the hands of Division Commander Tian Hu. "Tell everyone to eat and take the time to rest. We still have to continue our journey." Tian, who ordered the messenger beside him as he ate the hot dishes prepared by the chefs in the city Lord Mansion. After noon, the mighty bicycle army finally arrived. As soon as the 4th Division of the Cold Front Division appeared outside the city, the north gate of Jiba City was opened from the inside. A line of cavalry poured out and made a gesture of welcoming them into the city. The 1st Cavalry Division is really fast. With a sigh, Division Commander De Chong led the army into the city. Only half an hour later, the 1st Cavalry Division, who had been properly rested, left the city again. They handed over the management of Jiba City to the 4th Division of the Cold Front Division. In this regard, some of the officers of the 4th Division of the Cold Front Division were naturally unhappy. They were the main force, okay? Now it was like they were logistics troops receiving goods. But they had no choice. They rushed all the way here, and even their legs were sore from riding the bicycle. Now that they no longer had the strength to continue fighting outside the city, the name of the vanguard could only be placed on the 1st Cavalry Division. Compared to the 4th Division of the Cold Front Division, which was only a few hours later, 8,000 auxiliary soldiers and 8,000 Lao soldiers rushed to Jiba City early the next morning. Then the management of the city was once again handed over. The 4th Division of the Cold Front Division went straight to Jigging City, another important city of the Phnom Penh dynasty in the south. Jigging City, the main city in the north of the Phnom Penh dynasty. The population was close to 300,000, and there were about 5,000 troops stationed there. According to the rank of the defending general, Zhao En was a 3rd-grade general of the Phnom Penh dynasty and had a lot of power. The news of the 5 blockade lines and the capture of Jiba City had not spread back. The defense of Jigging City was also as usual, and there was no increase in strength. General Zhao En also did not know that a disaster was about to befall him. He was still in the general's mansion in the city, listening to music and eating as usual. The 1st Cavalry Division, after rushing for half a day and a night, finally arrived 10 miles away from Jigging City before dawn. The cavalry scouts at the front had already sent back news that there was no place to hide the army outside the north of the city. Thus, Division Commander Tian, who gave the order for everyone to rest at a spot 10 li away from the city to recover their energy and charge into the city with vigor. This is the information sent by the Security Bureau. This is the location of the city lord's mansion. This is the general's mansion. This is the granary. This is the city's warehouse. Tian, who hurriedly pointed out 7 or 8 very important locations. He then gave the 3 regimental commanders an order. Once they charged into the city, each regiment needed to occupy and control where they needed to occupy. The sky was bright, and the gate of Jigging City was wide open. The 1st Cavalry Division, 10 miles away, launched a charge. Just like in Jiba City, the appearance of the cavalry caught the defenders in the city by surprise. Just like in Jiba City, the cavalry did not even have time to close the city gate. Dozens of bows and arrows pierced through the air, and at the same time, the cavalry rushed into the city. Jigging City fell into the enemy's hands. General Zhao En was killed for resisting, and the governor and a group of city officials were captured alive. The only regret was that the fire in the city was lit, and the news of the battle here spread out. Let it spread out. We can't kill all the way to the capital of the Golden Bien dynasty quietly. Let's wait for the arrival of the 4th Cold Front Division, and the army will rest here. Tian, who did not show an angry look on his face. Since it was a sneak attack, they must be prepared to be discovered. They had occupied 2 cities in 2 days, one of which was an important town, and attacked their cavalry team, which was the least good at sieges. This result already made him very satisfied. In the evening, the 4th Cold Front Division was ready to appear. For a moment, the 2 armies converged in Jigging City. At this moment, when the division commanders and regimental commanders of both sides sat together, there was no contempt in their eyes like before, only admiration. What Tian Hu and the others admired was the tenacity of the 4th Cold Front Division. They relied on their legs to pedal the bicycle all the way, and they were not left behind even after 12 hours, which was half a day. Just this tenacity alone was enough to make people respect them. What Ling Dechang and the others admired was the drive of the 1st Cavalry Division. Along the way, everywhere they went, it was as if there was no one around. Such an army, such a powerful force, made them respect them from the bottom of their hearts. Division Commanderling, the news has been leaked. It is probably impossible for us to sneak attack again. Next, we will have to rely on you to attack Chuanlong City. Tian, who talked about the battle in front of them. Since it was a siege, of course, the Cold Front Division, which was armed with firearms, would be the main force. Haha, no problem, no problem. Division Commander Tian and the others must be tired from the journey, and the war horses also need to be fed. This battle will depend on the 4th Division's performance. Ling Dechang said with a polite face. In his heart, he felt a sense of exaltation. Along the way, the 1st Cavalry Division had always been ahead of them. This time, they could finally perform well. Okay, Tian, who still had a calm face as he replied. Perhaps he understood Ling Dechang's meaning, or perhaps he didn't. However, they were all members of the mercenary army, and there were some jobs that required cooperation. Ling Dechang laughed and left. Tian, who then said to the soldier beside him, "Inform the 3 regimental commanders to let them and the soldiers rest well. There will be a big battle soon." The 4th Cold Front Division moved quickly. Perhaps they were eager to show off. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, when the 4 auxiliary battalions in charge of receiving the captives arrived, they handed over the mission of guarding Jijing City. Then the army left the city and rushed to Chuanlong City, which was 120 miles away. Standing on the city gate tower, Temu watched the 4th Cold Front Division leave the city. He couldn't help but ask, "Are we handing over the mission of being the vanguard?" "Of course not. But for now, rest is the priority." Tian, who shook his head and then ordered the 3 regimental commanders. The 4th Division of the Cold Front left Orange Well City and used an afternoon to ride to the outskirts of Chuanlong City. Facing the tightly shut city gates, Division Commander Dechang gave the order and the mortars roared, hitting the city walls in the north. A huge hole appeared. A group that had long been prepared at the side sounded the bugle call to charge. 2,000 soldiers rushed out and entered Chuanlong City. The siege was unexpectedly smooth. Ling Dechang, who was standing in the middle of the army, put down his binoculars and shook his head. "It seems that the enemy has retreated. This is an undefended city. It could be a trap." "A trap? Are you saying that the Gold Border dynasty wants to lure us in and then catch us in a jar?" Hewen immediately realized that his analogy was inappropriate. He quickly shut his mouth. "It doesn't sound nice, but that should be what it means." Ling Dechang said casually, "If that's the case, then we won't enter the city. We'll find a wide area outside the city and wait. Let's see what tricks they have up their sleeves." The 3rd Regiment Commander Lu Zheng snorted. Obviously, he looked down on the little tricks that only 3-year-olds would play. Chapter 918. "Commander Yi, what do you think?" Ling Dechang seemed to value Yi Xingfeng a lot, or maybe he was very democratic. In any case, every time he discussed something, he needed everyone to express their opinion. The 4th Commander, Yi Xingfeng, narrowed his eyes. "We can do as Commander Lu says, but if we do that, the enemy will definitely not attack rashly. If that happens, we will lose a chance to kill the enemy." "What do you mean? Are we going to jump into a trap even if we know it's one? Is it just to lure the enemy?" 3rd Commander Lu Zheng saw that Yi Xingfeng was going to reject his suggestion, so his voice carried a trace of doubt. "If we want to kill more enemies, then we should jump in. The 6th young master has taught us a lesson. Only by eliminating the enemy's strength to the greatest extent can we establish an invincible foundation. I just don't want to miss a chance to kill the enemy. Sigh, it would be great if Under Heaven's Cavalry Division No. 1 moved with us. With their cooperation, even if it was a trap, we could easily tear a hole in it." Yi Xingfeng said honestly. He had no intention of targeting Commander Lu Zheng. It was just that, in a war, there were differences between the main force and the cooperation. It was normal to have different opinions, but to have grudges because of work was a serious work problem. Long before the battle, Yang Qindong had told them that if they found any grudges between officers of the same rank due to work, the wrongdoer would be severely punished. It was even possible that they would be stripped of their uniform and be expelled from the army. This was just one of Yang Qindong's strategies. It was to prevent disunity between officers. This was because the result of distrust could cause a war to go from victory to defeat. Yi Xingfeng thought of this and didn't want to argue with Lu Zheng. Lu Zheng seemed to have thought of something as well. He didn't argue with Yi Xingfeng and chose to keep quiet. Since he had already expressed his opinion, what to do next would be up to his division commander. Ling Dechang didn't care about the opinions of his subordinates. It was normal to have disagreements at work. Since he was able to take on the role of commander of Lingfeng, There was no problem with his personality. What he was thinking about now was whether he should enter the city or not. Just as Yi Xingfeng had said, once they entered the city, there would naturally be dangers. It was even possible for them to be surrounded. However, if they didn't enter the city, the enemy wouldn't appear. In this way, they wouldn't be able to severely damage the enemy's strength. Once the army enters the city, I don't believe that with the strength of our Cold Front Division, we will be afraid of these gold-edged soldiers. As for the 1st Cavalry Division, they are too tired from being the vanguard. Let them have a good rest in Orange Well City tonight. Ling Daqiang finally made the decision to enter the city. In his view, in front of great strength, all schemes and schemes were useless. This time, their 4th Division was going to use their military might and fighting strength to tell the enemy that in front of them, all schemes and schemes were like clowns jumping on a beam. They would be useless. The division commander gave the order, and the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th regiments, as well as the division battalions, began to enter Chuanlong City. As soon as they entered the city, they immediately occupied 4 city towers, overlooking everything inside and outside the city from a high vantage point. Lung Feng's 4 divisions entered the city. This scene was discovered by the scouts of Jin Bian dynasty in the distance. Then the news spread. Jin Bian army, who had already retreated from Chuanlong City, and reinforcements from Suing City arrived one after another. They surrounded Chuanlong City from 4 different directions. As expected, it was a trap. Standing on the city tower, Ling Daqiang saw the 30,000-strong army of the Gold-Edge dynasty through his binoculars. He even saw the trebuchets and other siege weapons among the enemy troops. Give the order. The soldiers will guard the 4 city towers in company units. The other soldiers should take the time to rest and wait for dawn to counterattack. Ling Daqiang didn't expect the enemy to surround the city. On the contrary, he became excited because of the enemy's appearance. In his view, this would be a counterattack without any suspense, and the final victory would belong to him. However, there was one thing he didn't expect, which was that there was a tactic called the center blossoming. From the moment the warning fireworks were lit on Jujing City, Chuanlong City was ready to abandon the city after receiving the news. This was originally a high-level secret of the Gold Edge dynasty's military. Even the Security Bureau didn't know about it. That was, once the city couldn't be defended, they would abandon it and use the center blossoming to inflict heavy damage on the enemy troops. Then they would win the war. To put it bluntly, they would give up the city first and wait for the enemy to enter the city. Then they would set the city on fire at the right time to interfere with the enemy's arrangement in the city. Then they would work together to eliminate the enemy. And now they were using this method. Taking advantage of the fact that the sky had already darkened by the time the 4 Cold Front Division entered the city, they were unable to carefully investigate the situation within the city. Thus, they were preparing to set Chuanlong City on fire. Of course, the Cold Front Division were not to be trifled with. There was one rule in their training. When they entered a city, the first thing they had to do was to clear all the possible dangers in the city. In fact, they did this, but the direction was a little wrong. They mainly cleared out the mayor's residence in the city. They didn't search the general's residence, the granary, the storehouse, and other important places where the people gathered. After all, there were too many places like this, and it was far from being clear in a short time. Moreover, the Cold Front Division had the 95 style. If someone confronted them face to face, they wouldn't be afraid of anyone or any army. 10 miles north of Chuanlong City, 30,000 Gold Edge dynasty troops were gathered here. The leader was one of the generals of the Gold Edge dynasty, Hamo. He was originally a general sent by the dynasty to guard Suing City. This time, after hearing about the incident in Jujing City, he mobilized 10,000 guards in Suing City. In addition, the guards in some nearby cities gathered together with the soldiers who escaped from Chuanlong City. In a very short time, they set up such a pocket and waited for the mercenaries to enter. After the scouts in front of him sent news that the mercenaries had blasted open the north gate of Chuanlong City, he became very nervous. He even regretted not leaving a few thousand people to guard the city. At least he could create a false impression for the mercenaries that Chuanlong City was not intentionally given up by him, but was taken by force. This way, the other party could enter the city and trick them. Hamo prayed in his heart that the mercenaries must enter the city. Otherwise, all his preparations would be in vain. Not only that, he might even be accused of giving up on Chuanlong City and retreating without a fight. Amidst his nervousness, time seemed to pass very slowly. When the scouts sent news that the mercenaries had all entered the city, and there were nearly 10,000 of them, Hamo's anxious heart slowly relaxed. Nearly 10,000 enemies were now surrounded by him. With 3 times the number of soldiers and the support of the people in the city, Hamo seemed to see a golden path in front of him. What were mercenaries? Even General Dagon and General Hun's son had been defeated by such a powerful enemy. If he defeated them, wouldn't that prove that he was more powerful than these 2 generals? At that time, everyone would think highly of him. At that time, wouldn't glory, splendor, and wealth be within reach? Excited, Hamo began to mobilize his troops. Of the 30,000 soldiers under him, 20,000 were sent out, 5,000 to each gate. He wanted to teach the mercenaries a lesson. The outside of Chuanlong City was completely surrounded. Inside the city, Ling Daqiang did not panic in the slightest. At this moment, he was only waiting for the enemy to take the initiative to attack. Then he would let the enemy know that in the face of great power, this so-called siege was a joke. Just as Ling Daqiang was waiting for the other party to attack, he suddenly felt the surrounding temperature rise. Then a huge fire shone on his face, and his expression turned ugly in an instant. Reporting to division commander, many places in the city have been set ablaze, and the fire is spreading rapidly. The 4 commanders ask for instructions. What should we do? Reporting to division commander, the fire has spread everywhere, and it is impossible to extinguish it. Moreover, it seems to be surrounding our army. The 4 commanders ask for instructions. Should we break out of the city? Reporting to division commander, we must retreat. The fire is about to reach you. Please leave with us. News after news was sent to Ling Daqiang, and he finally figured out what the Phnom Penh army was planning. He thought that he had been very careful, but he did not expect the enemy to be so crazy. The fire started in the residential area first, and many people in the city would be buried with it. Really ruthless. Ling Daqiang sighed and sighed. In order to win, the Phnom Penh army treated the lives of the people like grass. He shook his head and issued a military order, ordering all the troops to withdraw from the north gate. After issuing the order, Ling Daqiang staggered and almost fell to the ground. Forcibly leaving the city in the middle of the night was not a wise move. Although the 4 divisions of the Cold Front were well trained, and there should be no chaos in the army, it was inevitable that they would suffer losses in a hurry. Ling Daqiang, who was supported by the guards, was now thinking of reducing the losses as much as possible. If the 4 divisions were seriously injured because of this, he was afraid that he would not have the face to see the 6th young master and his other comrades. The fire was burning in Chuanlong City, and it was clearly visible from far away. In the middle of the Phnom Penh army, General Hamo laughed. He did not dare to expect that the 30,000 troops could eliminate nearly 10,000 mercenaries, but as long as they could seriously injure them and force them to retreat, it would be a great achievement. Chapter 919. The golden path was right in front of him, and it was only a matter of time before he was made a marquis. At this moment, Hamo felt that the air was so fresh and life was so beautiful. However, all of this quickly disappeared. A group of cavalrymen had entered the battlefield at some point in time and were heading straight for the side of his army. Kill! Don't leave a single one alive. Tian, who rode on his horse and waved his 2 swords as he killed his way into the middle of the Phnom Penh army. One by one, the unprepared Phnom Penh soldiers were cut down under their horses. The sudden appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division was completely out of Hamo's expectations. Faced with this sudden attack, the Central Army did not even last half an hour before collapsing. Even more people were scared out of their wits in the face of this murderous god from hell. They did not even have the courage to fight and turned to flee. More and more deserters appeared, and Hubo led the 2nd Regiment to attack from the left flank. Wherever they went, it was like hell on earth, and those who stood in their way were either dead or heavily injured. Their sharp sabers beheaded enemy after enemy, and the morale of the Phnom Penh army was completely crushed. Seeing the heads of the soldiers sent flying in just a few moments, Hamo was also scared out of his wits. He abandoned his army and fled under the protection of some of his personal guards. "There's an enemy cavalry unit over there. Chase after them." Hubo led the charge, and after killing a dozen enemies, he saw Hamo fleeing and immediately led the 3rd Regiment to chase after him. The 1st and 2nd Regiments also entered the battlefield at this moment and began their work like reaping machines. Originally, victory was in their grasp, and even victory was right in front of their eyes. However, the sudden appearance of the world's 1st Cavalry Division changed the situation. With Hamo's escape, the Central Army fell into chaos, and the entire army lost a unified commander. When the 4th Regiment of the Cold Front Division retreated from the north gate of Chuanlong City, they did not see the Central Army that was supposed to be gathered here. There were only 5,000 enemies that were supposed to be here. Open fire! Exterminate them! There were only 5,000 enemies. The 1st Regiment commander immediately gave the order to counterattack. The 2,000 soldiers of the 1st Regiment took turns to provide cover as they charged towards the 5,000 enemies. The Gold Edge Army outside the North Gate was very excited when they saw the mercenaries appear. They were waiting for the reinforcements outside the other gates to arrive. Then they could rush forward with their large number of soldiers. As long as they could fight with the mercenaries, the power of the other party's flintlock would be greatly hindered. With their strength, they might win the final victory. However, after waiting for a long time, not only did they not see any reinforcements, they instead received a piece of shocking news. The main army had been disrupted by the mercenaries' cavalry, and Hamo had already fled towards Suing City. Where did the cavalry come from? Or was this simply the mercenaries' plan to beat them at their own game? Thinking that this might be the other party's plan, the 5,000 soldiers of Phnom Penh who were guarding the North Gate were in a mess. They thought that they had set a trap and were going to deal with others. Only then did he realize that he was the one who had fallen into the trap. Even so, how could they still dare to stay here and wait for the other party to eat them? Before they could charge, the 5,000 soldiers retreated in chaos. Without any threat, the 1st Regiment quickly steadied themselves. Then the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Regiment, including the last Division's battalion, safely withdrew from Chuanlong City. Although they were covered in dust when they left the city, and hundreds of soldiers were slightly burned, no one paid with their lives for this. Most importantly, the army withdrew safely and did not encounter the siege outside the city as they had imagined. The division commander, De Chong, had a puzzled expression. He did not understand what the Gold Edge Army was doing. Why did they give up this opportunity to seriously injure him? Did they just set a fire to scare him? Investigate. Send out all the scouts. Find out what's going on. A commander who did not understand the situation on the battlefield was not fit for his job. De Chong felt that he was now blind and had lost his wisdom. Reporting, the world's #1 Cavalry Division is calling. A telegram appeared at the right time and gave a brief explanation of the situation on the battlefield. Looking at the telegram sent by Tian, he finally understood the situation outside. Da Chiang let out a sigh of relief. Commander Tian called. They have broken through the middle of the Phnom Penh army and are now chasing the enemy generals. They are ready to kill their way into Suing City. He asked us to eliminate the remaining enemies here as soon as possible, and then asked us to meet in Suing City. After a brief explanation of the situation, De Chong's face was filled with emotions. He had always thought that he could be faster than the enemy, but now it seemed that the credit would be taken by the enemy. But this time he was not jealous. If the enemy had not appeared in time, the 4 divisions of Lung Feng would have been heavily injured. The enemy had saved his life, and he had to acknowledge this debt. Every regiment, quickly eliminate the enemy, gather in 4 hours, and set off for Su Wing City. De Chong used his identity as a division commander to point out the direction for the troops. Sporadic gunshots rang out on the battlefield. Hubo was closely following the dozens of cavalry in front of him. After confirming that the enemy was the Gold Edge general and that they were escaping in the direction of Su Wing City, he was no longer in a hurry. He had the soldiers follow behind at a distance of 1 li, neither fast nor slow. Every cavalry member of the 1st Cavalry Division had brought 2 groups of war horses with them. They could switch horses at any time to increase their speed to the maximum and also to maintain their peak condition. Hubo are intentionally slowed down. After more than 2 hours, Division Commander Tian, who led the main force, to catch up. When he saw that the 3 regiments were only following closely behind and did not launch a quick attack, Tian, whose usually stern face, actually revealed a smile. Not bad, not bad. Commander, who is very considerate. Clearly, Tian, who had seen through Hubo's plan to bait the big fish. With the speed of 1 man and 2 horses of the 1st Cavalry Division, it was naturally not difficult for them to catch up to Hamo. However, they did not do so because they wanted to use this person to knock down Su Wing City's sturdy gates. News of their appearance had already spread. It was impossible to sneak into the city like before. Cavalry sieges were ultimately a weakness. If they could not sneak in and force their way through, they could only rely on their wits. Hamo was a very good bait. In order to allow the 3 regiments to successfully complete their mission, Tian, who took the initiative to maintain a certain distance, giving them enough space to execute their plan. When Hubo discovered that the main force was not in a hurry to meet up with him, he relaxed. Since his division commander had already understood his intentions, he would just have to perform well. General Hamo, who was running at the front, would occasionally turn back to look. When he discovered that the distance between the 2 sides was always about 1 li, he finally let out a sigh of relief. Reality had proven that the difference in speed between the 2 sides was not much. This 1 li distance would be his chance of survival. It was supposed to be a night of harvesting the fruits of their victory, but Hammer had been running all night. Around noon the next day, the gates of Su Wing City finally appeared in his line of sight. At that moment, he felt like crying. Everyone, your blood will not be shed in vain. I will take care of your families. Right now, this general orders you to bring up the rear and buy time for me to enter the city. When they were 4 li away from the tightly shut gates of Su Wing City, Hamo revealed his true appearance and ordered his personal guards to bring up the rear. Behind them was the 1st Cavalry Division. If they stayed behind, they would undoubtedly die. But even if Hamo gave the order, if they disobeyed, they would still die. Moreover, their families would not be taken care of. At this moment, the dozens of bodyguards revealed pained expressions on their faces. General, you must do as you say. I'll leave my mother in your care. General, my son is still young. I hope you can take care of him for a few more years and help him grow up. General, my father's health is not good. The personal guard spoke to Hamo as if they were leaving behind their last words. Then, when they were 1 li away from the gates, the several dozen riders stopped and turned their horses around, preparing to fight to the death and buy time for the general to enter the city. Hamo nodded one by one. He would agree to any request made by his personal guards, but only he knew whether he would really do it. His personal guards stayed behind to bring up the rear. He rode alone to the northern gates of Su Wing City and shouted at the top of the city tower, I am General Hamo. I have important military intelligence to report. Open the gates immediately and let me in. General, the enemy is behind you. It's too dangerous to open the gates now. A centurion guarding the city looked at the unidentified cavalrymen who were only a mile away from the city gate and said while spinning his legs, "If you can't report this important intelligence to the king, then you will all die. All of you will die. I order you to open the gates now. Hurry!" Hamo did not care. He had fled for an entire night and half a day, sacrificing all of his personal guards, all for the sake of his life. To achieve this goal, he had constantly roared and threatened. Hamo's rank in the army was very high. Now that he had given the order, the centurion was forced to open the gates, since there was no general guarding Suwing City. As the gates opened bit by bit, Hamo's face was filled with excitement. When he thought about how he could finally live, he happily turned around. When he turned around, he immediately felt his soul leaving his body. 2 of his 3 souls were gone. He did not know when, but the several dozen personal guards he had left behind had already turned into corpses lying on the ground. The enemy cavalry behind him was less than an arrow's throw away. "Ah, open the gates! Open the gates!" Hamo's thirst for life made him shout loudly. At that moment, as if the heavens had heard his prayers, the gates finally opened halfway, allowing a cavalry to enter. Chapter 920. Ha 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 ha. Ah! Just as Hammer was about to enter, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his back. When he looked down, he saw a sharp arrow protruding from the left side of his chest. His expression quickly froze, and with a plop, Hammer fell off his horse. It was Hubo who shot the arrow. After severely injuring Hamo with an arrow, he was the first to arrive at the city gate. With a swing of his saber, a gold-rimmed soldier who was about to close the gate was cut down to the ground. The city gate was half opened, giving the remaining cavalrymen an opening to enter. They were like great white sharks that had smelled blood and took the opportunity to enter. "Men, tie this man up." Thinking that he had captured the enemy's general alive, Hubo ordered his men to take him down. Then he and the others pushed the half-open gate open completely. At this moment, Tian, who arrived with the 1st and 2nd regiments, the army successfully entered the city. The bravery of the cavalry was not something the gilded border soldiers could resist. With the speed of the war horses, the front of the gate was soon littered with corpses. The mercenaries had entered the city. As soon as the news spread, the gilded border soldiers at the other gates fled madly. At this moment, they only wished their parents had given them 2 more legs. The officials of the gilded border dynasty, who were in charge of the defense of Suwing City, all fled when they heard that the mercenaries had suddenly entered the city. Some even left their families behind, hoping to escape with their lives. No one would have thought that a strategic location like Suwing City, the gateway to the capital of the gilded border dynasty, would be given up just like that. There was not even a decent resistance. As it turned out, the speed of the 1st Cavalry Division's attack exceeded everyone's expectations. Tian, who entered the city and quickly took over the 4 gates, as well as the granaries and storehouses. They did not act rashly. There were tens of thousands of soldiers and hundreds of thousands of civilians in the city. They only had 6,000 people. If something unexpected happened, the weakness of their forces would be exposed. It might even lead to a strong counterattack. Guard the 4 gates and the important places. Don't worry about the other places. Just let them do whatever they want. The commander gave the order, and the cavalry naturally followed it. As a result, the people in the city were the ones who suffered. When the Phnom Penh troops, who were afraid of death and had just fled to various parts of the city, found that the mercenaries did not launch a large-scale search and massacre, they did not think about how to rush out of the city, but how to burn, kill, and loot during this unregulated time. Everyone had their own selfish desires, and they also had a dark side to them. Usually because of the strict management, they had to be self-disciplined. Most people didn't dare to show it, but now it was different. The law that was weighing on their heads had disappeared. They didn't even see a single person in charge. They had become completely free people and could do whatever they wanted. As a result, it was inevitable that the army would loot the civilians. The thugs on the streets would loot the civilians. Even the younger and stronger men would form groups of 3 to 5 to loot the civilians. The wealthy families in the city who didn't manage to escape in time couldn't avoid becoming the first targets. Su Wing City was in chaos, and there were sounds of fighting and killing everywhere. Who knew how many commoners had suffered an undeserved calamity? Their families' only wealth had been rummaged through and taken away. The young women in the family, or those who were slightly more beautiful, had also become the targets of the robbery. Cries and shouts could be heard incessantly, begging for mercy and complaining. On the streets, one could often see groups of robbers running back and forth. Sometimes they would even engage in internal strife due to the uneven distribution of the spoils. The sounds of swords clashing were also incessant. Standing on top of the 4 city towers, one could roughly see what was happening in the city center. Tian, who called the 3 commanders to inquire about the situation. But when it came to the civil strife in the city, no one mentioned it. This kind of internal strife was beneficial to the mercenaries. More importantly, after this internal strife, the people here hated the bandits far more than they hated them. Moreover, the mercenaries could enter in the name of suppressing the bandits and take the wealth that originally belonged to the people from the bandits openly. They didn't have to worry about being criticized by others or being pressured by public opinion. Half a day later, the 4th Division of the Lung Feng Army entered Suing City. A day later, the first batch of 4 battalions of auxiliary soldiers entered the city. 2 days later, Yang Qindong arrived in Suing City under the protection of 1,000 guards. Along with him were 10 battalions of auxiliary soldiers and 5,000 Lao army soldiers. Their strength continued to grow. After 4 days of looting, Suing City was in chaos. On the streets, there were women and old people who had been killed, as well as men who had killed each other. The doors of some houses were wide open, indicating that they had experienced an inhumane robbery and that their houses had nothing on them. It's time to end this. Pass the order down, reel in the net. Anyone who resists, kill. Yang Qindong stood on top of the southern city tower, looking at the burning Suing City, and said with a hint of anger, this scene was not out of Yang Qindong's expectations. Perhaps this was part of human nature. Before the war, Yang Qindong had thought of all sorts of possibilities. He even thought that after this battle, the Kim Bien dynasty would suffer heavy losses. But this was war, a game where either you die or I live. There was a saying that mercy to the enemy was cruelty to oneself. Since Yang Qindong already knew about the story of the farmer and the snake, he would not let it happen again. Otherwise, in the near future, the ones who would die would be the Han people. As the saying goes, if I don't go to hell, who will? For the sake of the Han people, for the sake of dignity, for the sake of the future generations, some sacrifices were necessary. It was like a person eating a bun. Not only could he eat meat, but he could also eat noodles. War was the same. The army of the enemy forces must be destroyed, and the people of the enemy forces must also be affected. This was inevitable. I hope the world can be peaceful in the future. After today's battle, Yang Qindong didn't dare to hope that there would be no more wars in this world, but at the very least it could last for a few more years. It could give the people more time to live in peace and a better environment. It could also let them know that life was actually very beautiful. Send a message to Yang and ask him to persuade the Kim Bien royal family to surrender. If there is no news after 2 days, we will launch a new round of attacks. The attack was so smooth, especially the excellent performance of the 1st Cavalry Division, which was somewhat beyond Yang Qindong's expectations. Now it was time to force the other party to surrender. Kim Bien City, the capital of the Kim Bien dynasty. The news of the mercenary army's invasion and the capture of Jiba, Orange Well, Chuanlong, and Suing cities spread throughout Kim Bien City. For a time, the people were in a panic, and the social order began to be chaotic. More than a year ago, The Kim Bien dynasty had experienced such a war, but fortunately the foundation was good. Although some aspects of work had not been fully restored after the war, at least the lives of the people were still guaranteed. And this time, the scale of the army was obviously larger than the previous one. The experienced merchants in the city immediately began to hoard goods. For a time, the price of rice in Kim Bien had become so expensive that the people at the bottom had no food to eat. Even the ordinary people were facing the possibility of starvation at any time. The regime of the Kim Bien dynasty was still there, so it was naturally impossible for there to be civil strife like in Suing City. However, there was already chaos on the streets. For this reason, the city guards were dispatched twice to arrest some people. But this was just a temporary solution. When the people had no food to eat, even if they knew that they would be beheaded, they would still rebel. In the palace, King Boromir was sitting high, discussing countermeasures with his ministers. Compared to usual, Boromir's face was obviously anxious at this moment. This time, the mercenaries had gone to war without declaring war. Not only did it violate the rules, but it also caught him off guard. Based on the battle reports, the mercenaries had sent out very elite troops. It was not like the intelligence report said that they used the local army, like Laos. What are you doing? What are you doing? Drag them out and behead them in public. As soon as the meeting began, Boromir did not hide the anger in his heart. The first person to be executed was the official in charge of the intelligence department. Because he did not give a warning in time, he became the first high-ranking official to be beheaded. Cries for help and cries of injustice echoed in the hall. The official in charge of the intelligence department had already been dragged out. Not long after, there were no more cries. It was obvious that he was dead. For a moment, many of the ministers' faces were very ugly. The king was really angry. At this moment, if he said something wrong, it was very likely that he would bring about an unexpected disaster. Boromir's emotions didn't ease up even after killing the soldiers. His eyes flickered as he looked at the ministers and said in a hoarse voice, "Nearly 100,000 soldiers were completely defeated in just a few days. Most of them were killed or captured, and the cities were lost one after another. Who can answer me? Why is this so? Also, what do you mean by the city's impregnable defense? Who can explain?" In the face of the king's anger, many of the ministers lowered their heads. Everyone knew the strength of the Phnom Penh army. It was not a problem to frighten the ordinary people. However, it was not on the same level as the elite mercenaries. Not to mention, the mercenaries had launched a surprise attack. They were not prepared at all. It was normal for such an outcome to happen. What they were thinking about now was what the mercenaries were after this time. Should it be the same deterrence as last time? Or should it be more beneficial? Or did they really want to annex the entire Phnom Penh dynasty, just like how they had annexed the Jiaoji and Lonsong kingdoms? Chapter 9:21. At this moment, the ministers realized that they still knew too little about the mercenaries' appetites and strength. They couldn't make the right judgment and naturally didn't know what to say. The ministers kept their mouths shut and the palace was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. King Boromir was furious and shouted, "What? Are you all mute? Weren't they all good at talking when they were fighting for power and profit? Why aren't you speaking now? Speak, speak to this prince, otherwise all of you will be thrown into the prison. Speak." Since Boromir was angry, the ministers couldn't remain silent. Right Prime Minister Dun stood at the head of the crowd. He felt that the time was right and was the first to step forward. "Your Majesty, I have something to say." "Right Prime Minister, speak." Boromir's eyes lit up when he saw Dun step forward. "Your Majesty, the mercenaries' representative, Mr. Yunk, has arrived at Golden Rim City and is now in my residence. He brought the latest news of the great Ming dynasty's Duke Zhongwei and requested to meet with your Majesty." Dun looked up at Boromir and said. After he finished speaking, he lowered his head, his eyes focused on his nose, and his nose focused on his heart. He was as silent as a monk. He knew what kind of consequences he would face after saying those words. However, he knew that he would be fine. This was because he represented peace talks. Although this was not the king's first choice, it was still a path of retreat. Unless the mercenaries were defeated, no one would give up this path of retreat so easily. This was where the king's survival lay. Sure enough, after saying this, Dun was immediately attacked by all kinds of people. What traitor? What traitor? What spy? All sorts of accusations were thrown at him. At this moment, the officials were furious. It was as if anyone who did not open their mouths to scold Dwayne might be Dwayne's accomplice. Among them, Left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei was the most enthusiastic. The last time the mercenaries came, he suffered a lot because he misjudged the situation. Fortunately, he was experienced enough and had the king's trust, so he was able to retain his position. However, since then he was obviously at a disadvantage when fighting with the right prime minister. After becoming the minister of the left, Ding Dingwei's wisdom was needless to say. He quickly went into hiding and waited for an opportunity to counterattack. Now that the opportunity presented itself, he would not let it go. He began to scold Dun. When he felt tired, he saluted Boromir and said, "Your Majesty, Dun's heart is no longer with the Golden Bien dynasty. He is clearly a spy for the mercenaries, a spy. This subject requests your Majesty to give the order to kill him, and then surround the right Prime Minister's residence. Capture the mercenary representative, Yunk, and behead him in public." "Your Majesty, please give the order to kill Dun and the mercenary representative." The courtiers replied in unison, their expressions solemn, as if they had some sort of life and death feud with Dun and Skylark. Boromir did not look pleased at the unity of his subordinates. He knew that these officials were just worried that he would make an example out of them. Now that they had another target to vent their anger on, they wanted to divert the conflict. What Dun did really annoyed him. He secretly communicated with the mercenaries without a decree. How could a loyal official do such a thing? For this reason, it wouldn't be too much to teach him a lesson, but there was no need to kill him. According to the reports from the front lines, the mercenaries had occupied Su Wing City for several days and had no intention of attacking. He could use this opportunity to mobilize his troops, but if he killed the other party's messenger, it would be forcing the mercenaries to be ruthless, which would be equivalent to slapping himself in the face, and he would not do such a thing. It was precisely because Dun had grasped the king's mentality that he was able to say these things without fear. Now that the courtiers had shouted their request, they only needed to wait for Boromir's answer. At this moment, Dun raised his head and looked at their high and mighty king. "Well, why don't we kill the messenger when two countries are at war? Everyone wants me to kill the messenger. Isn't that making this king unjust? Ah, men, go to the right prime minister's residence and bring the messenger of the mercenaries here." Boromir finally made his decision and pretended to reprimand his subordinates. Many of the courtiers immediately shut their mouths. They had no intention of going against the right prime minister, but the situation was like this. If they did not stand up, it would be easy for them to be punished. They were just following the crowd and shouting their slogans. As for the final decision, it was up to His Majesty to make. Now that the decision was made, many courtiers wisely shut their mouths. Only the left prime minister, Ding Dingwei, continued to shout, "Your Majesty, we can meet the messenger, but Dun is indeed suspected of being in cahoots with foreign countries. He must be severely punished. Otherwise, if everyone follows suit, wouldn't the country be in chaos? All right, left prime minister. This king understands everything. Let's talk about it after we meet the messenger." Boromir interrupted Ding Dingwei's request. He really wanted to figure out the purpose of this mercenary group, and before he had an answer, he wouldn't act rashly. The hall became quiet again. After about half an hour, the sound of footsteps finally came from outside the hall. The king's guards appeared, and behind them was a middle-aged man in Han Chinese clothes. His face was calm, and his eyes were spirited. He walked forward step by step and stood between the two rows of officials. Courtier Yunk greets your majesty and sends his greetings. You don't have to be so courteous. Boromir suppressed his anger and appeared very calm. After all, he was the king of a country. He could not lose his composure so easily. Thank you, your majesty. Skylark, who had no intention of greeting Boromir, immediately raised her head and smiled at Boromir. At this moment, Boromir also looked at the other party's face. After 2 breaths of time, Boromir was the first to feel uncomfortable. He gently tilted his head to the side and said, "This time, the Duke of Loyalty didn't even give a greeting before dispatching his troops. He killed 100,000 soldiers and nearly 1,000,000 civilians. He robbed my city and plundered my wealth. This kind of bandit behavior is shameful. Does the envoy have any explanation for this?" "Your Majesty is wrong. The Duke of Loyalty sent his troops to the south because you tore up the friendly trade agreement. You stationed your troops at the border and blocked the trade route. We were only passive and took the initiative to strike first." Yunk was already prepared for this, so he did not hesitate to answer. "Passive and took the initiative to strike first? Haha, what a joke!" Boromir looked up to the sky and laughed to express the anger in his heart. This was simply unreasonable, but he also knew that he was now the weaker party, and there was no point in continuing to argue. In Suing City, 300 miles away from Goldenrim City, the mercenaries might be ready to go. Now was not the time to reason, but to find out what the other party's purpose was. Soon after, Boromir stopped laughing. When he looked at Skylark, he regained his composure. "Emissary, why don't you tell me what your Duke of Loyalty wants?" "Okay." Yunk replied. He then raised his head and said in an incomparably serious tone, "The Duke of Loyalty said that the Golden Rim dynasty has gone back on its words, and there is no need for it to exist. Now, the only way out is to surrender. The Duke of Loyalty can guarantee everyone's safety. He can even protect part of everyone's personal wealth." "Shut up, bastard." Left Prime Minister Ding Dingway finally couldn't help but reprimand him. He raised his right hand and pointed at Yunk, saying, "Your Duke of Loyalty wants to annex my Golden Rim dynasty. He needs to have the strength and appetite to do so." "Haha, you must be the left Prime Minister. You will soon know if the Duke of Loyalty has such an appetite. Look at your 100,000 troops and several major cities. Didn't you lose them in just a few days? How many of such troops and major cities do you have? How many times can you withstand the attacks of the mercenaries? By the way, there is one thing I forgot to tell everyone. The Duke of Loyalty has already given an order. He will give you 2 days to surrender. Otherwise, you will know what it means to be under the pressure of a large army and what it means to be in despair. Shut up." Seeing Yunk boasting so shamelessly at this time, Ding Dingway roared angrily. He then turned to Boromir and said, "Your Majesty, this person was disrespectful to you in the hall. I would like to ask you to punish him for disrespect and behead him in public." Ding Dingway wanted to kill Yun Kei, but the person who was about to be killed had a calm expression on his face. It was as if he did not hear those words. His face was still incomparably calm, as if what they were talking about had nothing to do with him. Skylark's calm demeanor made Boromir gnash his teeth in anger. However, he knew that Skylark couldn't die just yet. Just as Right Prime Minister Du-En had thought, this would be a way out for him. Unless he could gain the upper hand, he couldn't casually kill the messenger sent by the Duke of Loyalty. That would create a life and death feud. On the contrary, not only could he not kill Yunk, but he also had to protect him. At least before the overall situation was settled, nothing could happen to this person. The Right Prime Minister is suspected of colluding with a foreign country. However, due to insufficient evidence, he is now relieved of all his duties. Go home and wait for orders. Messenger, please stay in the mansion with the Right Prime Minister. This king will consider your request. Sure enough, there was no killing, only house arrest. This result was within the expectations of many people. Right Minister Dunn and Emissary Yunk were already prepared. When they heard this decree, they didn't argue or refute it. Instead, they cupped their fists and the two of them walked down the hall. Chapter 9:22. When they left the hall, Minister Ding Ding Wei's voice was still echoing. "Your Majesty, you can't let them go." Boromir did not reply immediately. He watched them leave. Then he said, "How can I let them go? Keeping them alive will only numb the loyalty of the Duke of Valor and the mercenaries. Minister, let me ask you, if we gather the entire country's army to fight the mercenaries, what is the outcome?" Boromir was about to start a war. Ding Ding Wei calmed himself down and said, "There are too many borders between Phnom Penh and Laos. We can't mobilize the troops guarding the eastern cities. Otherwise, if the mercenaries attack from there, the consequences will be unimaginable. In this way, the only army that can be mobilized is the 200,000 soldiers near the royal city. However, according to the information we received, the mercenaries only have a few tens of thousands of people, and the elite strength is less than 20,000. With 200,000 against 20,000, even if it's a battle of attrition, we can still exhaust them to death." Good. King Boromir was waiting for this. It was almost impossible for him to surrender. At least, he would not surrender before the battle was over. Ding Ding Wei was also a little excited. What he needed to do now was to encourage the king. Otherwise, if the king of a country was about to admit defeat, what would the people below be able to do? "Your Majesty, we can put in 200,000 soldiers on the battlefield. As long as we can stop the enemy's attack, Siam and Ava will not sit back and do nothing. When their reinforcements arrive, it will be time for us to counterattack with all our might. If it's possible, the capital can start conscripting soldiers right now and mobilize the entire country. We have more than 4 million citizens, so it's possible for us to gather an army of a few 100,000. As long as your Majesty opens the national treasury, as long as there is money, it will be easy." Ding Ding Wei, who was getting more and more excited, seemed to have thought of something and continued. "Your Majesty, our intelligence department reported that in Dragon River City, a fire burned hundreds of thousands of our citizens, causing the entire Dragon River City to be plunged into misery and suffering. Once the mercenaries' actions are spread out, it will definitely attract the support of the citizens of the country. At that time, we can use the power of the country to block the mercenaries' iron hooves. Victory will eventually belong to us." Good. We will do as you say. However, we need to be careful about the recruitment of new soldiers. After all, the war is imminent. Even if these people join the army, they will not be able to form an effective fighting force in a short time. How about this? Let the officials and merchants in the capital take out some money and try to recruit some new soldiers. We will decide after we see how the situation goes." Boromir agreed to all of Ding Ding Wei's requests. He even gave him the command of the army. However, he had a different opinion on the recruitment of new soldiers. Saying that the new recruits were weak was just an excuse. In the end, Boromir did not want to use the money in the national treasury. From this, it could be seen that as the king, he did not have high hopes for this battle. No matter how dangerous the situation was, as long as he had money, he would have a chance to rise again. Left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei naturally saw through this point, but he did not raise any doubts about this matter. Rice had to be eaten one bite at a time. First, they had to decide on the idea of going to war. As for the matter of recruiting new soldiers, it was inevitable. As long as there was hope for victory, presumably the king would make the right choice. The court session came to an end. Ding Ding Wei was given power, and the army and local affairs were handed over to him. Orders were given out as the armies gathered and surrounded Suwing City from the vicinity of the royal capital. At some point, a rumor had spread in the city that the mercenaries were extremely cruel and had burned down Chuanlong City. The hundreds of thousands of people in the city had either died or been injured. The tens of thousands of gold-edged soldiers in the city had also suffered heavy losses. Commander Hamo had died heroically while protecting the civilians as they retreated. Once this news came out, it immediately aroused the hatred of many people. Many people began to look for ways to serve the country and resist the enemy. It was at this time that the officials and merchants of the royal capital began to donate money and goods. The leader was Ding Ding Wei. In order to raise more money and goods, he had sold an ancestral property in the royal capital. With him taking the lead, the other ministers and the merchants who were inextricably linked to them had no choice but to cough up some blood. Naturally, there was no lack of people who were stingy, but soon some people were arrested and imprisoned for various crimes. This was Ding Ding Wei's counterattack. He wanted to make an example out of them, and with such examples, the officials and merchants became more proactive in donating money and goods. Gold Edge City was making preparations for the counterattack under Ding Ding Wei's command. But no matter how hard they tried, 2 days of preparation was far from enough in the face of a war. For this matter, Ding Ding Wei went to the palace, hoping to have more time to prepare. King Boromir immediately agreed, and then sent someone to Dun's house to inform Skylark that they were considering and studying the issue of whether to surrender the mercenaries or not. But it was impossible to reach a consensus in a short time, so they needed more time to prepare. He also hoped that Skylark could inform the Duke of Loyalty to suspend all military operations. Okay, I got it. Skylark's face was calm, not showing the slightest excitement when the other party said that they were considering the issue of surrender. After the messenger left, Dun looked at Skylark nervously. Mr. Yin, you don't really think that my king will surrender to your mercenaries, do you? Why not? Skylark sat back on the chair and gently sipped the hot tea with a faint smile on his face. Mr. Yin, although we are under house arrest and can't get out, we can still hear some of the movements on the streets. Now that the entire King City is preparing to fight against the mercenaries, this is clearly the sign of a great war. The so-called surrender is just a temporary measure to buy time, Dwayne said with a tense expression. It was true that Dun was the right prime minister of the Goldenbean dynasty. However, with the appearance of Skylark and the conditions of the deal, he boarded the mercenary ship. He had already made his stand clear in the court. Now there was no way out. Next, unless the Gold Edge dynasty was really destroyed, otherwise, no matter where he lived in the future, he might face the possibility of revenge at any time. So if one had to say who was more nervous about the situation now, it was not Skylark but Dun. Skylark saw that Dun was so anxious, but his smile did not diminish. Sir Du's words are indeed for the sake of the mercenaries. Here, I would like to express my gratitude to you. Hey, we're all family. There's no need to thank me. Dun's face showed a pretentious expression, but in his heart, these words were very effective. He did not know why he believed Skylark's words so easily. At first, he regretted it. However, the front line of the war continued to send in news about the mercenaries' continuous victories and the Gold Edge army's continuous failures and retreats. He suddenly felt a little fortunate that his choice did not seem to be wrong. He thought that if the mercenaries really captured the Gold Edge dynasty like they did to Jiaoji and Kanglin Kingdom, although he could not be a minister in the court, he would be able to get the position of the president of the Gold Edge Region's Business Association, plus 200,000 taels of silver as a reward. Compared to those ministers who lost their countries, his treatment was quite good. After making up his mind to follow the mercenaries, Dun reminded Skylark to prevent the other party from playing any tricks. Skylark laughed and said, I just said that I know everything. But since Boromov did not make the decision to surrender, the attack after 2 days will not stop. Oh, now there should be 1 day left. Oh, ha ha ha. Skylark's answer made Dun stunned at first. Then he laughed. Yes, knowing did not mean that he would agree. It was just an attitude of returning the news. It seemed that this time the mercenaries would not stop until they had swallowed the Gold Edge dynasty. At this moment, Dun's worries disappeared. Unaware of the problem in Skylark's answer, Boromov sent someone to inform the left Prime Minister, Ding Ding Wei, after hearing the reply of the minister, who sent the right Prime Minister back. He said that the mercenaries should not launch any attacks in a short period of time, but he had to prepare faster. It would be best if they could win a big battle in Suing City first. It would boost the morale of the people and at the same time give them more initiative in the following negotiations. Ding Ding Wei, who received the king's order, did not dare to be negligent. He immediately ordered General Hun's son, one of the generals, to lead 50,000 troops to Suing City as the vanguard. There were still 50,000 troops from various places waiting there. When the 100,000 troops were in front of the road, perhaps there would be good news. Ding Ding Wei wanted to tell the mercenaries that this time the Gold Edge dynasty was ready for a decisive battle. If they must fight, then they would accompany them to the end. It was still unknown who would win and who would lose. At that time, the mercenaries would be deeply involved. At that time, if the Siam Kingdom and the Awa Kingdom took the opportunity to make trouble in the rear of Laos, it would not be easy for the mercenaries to retreat safely. Ding Ding Wei had planned everything very well. As long as he had enough time, with the support of His Majesty, he could confront the mercenaries. The outcome would be full of suspense. Once he defeated the mercenaries, his reputation would be unparalleled. In the future, history would have a fair evaluation of him, and it was even possible that it would be full of praise. Chapter 9:23. However, all of this changed with the arrival of a piece of news on the next day. At dusk on the second day, a piece of news that no one in Golden Rim City expected was heard. Just this morning, the mercenary ships suddenly fired cannons at the southern port of the Golden Rim dynasty. Under the bombardment, the defenses of the port were completely destroyed. Half an hour later, the mercenaries began to disembark and occupied the entire port. The Golden Rim dynasty's navy general, Bamboo, was killed in battle. Now, the army was spreading towards the southern White Horse region. In other words, after Suing City in the north, the war in the south had also begun, and it was sweeping over at a very fast speed. Ever since the first request for help was received at dusk, there would be another request for help every half an hour. The south was in danger. At this time, they finally understood the reason for the 2-day deadline. But didn't he greet Skylark before, and the other party also gave him an answer? Minister Ding Ding Wei was urgently summoned to the palace. He looked at King Boromir and asked with a puzzled expression, "Your Majesty, when you sent someone to ask Skylark, what did he say?" "He said he knew." "Doesn't that mean he admitted it?" Boromir was puzzled. "Ah, Your Majesty, we were fooled by them. He only said he knew. He didn't say they would stop attacking." Ding Ding Wei's expression changed after thinking for a while. "What? He dared to lie to me? Does he want to die?" Boromir gnashed his teeth in anger. He clenched his fists tightly, but he still didn't make up his mind to kill Skylark. There was no other way. The mercenaries had the upper hand in the current situation. He couldn't act rashly. "Your Majesty, the only thing we can do now is not to blame anyone. The war in the south will soon spread to the royal city. We have to find a way to stop them. Why don't we open the treasury and recruit new soldiers?" Ding Ding Wei once again wanted to open the treasury. Boromir wanted to nod at this moment, but he thought that there was still a way. He shook his head and said, "We have to recruit new soldiers, but I'm afraid it's too late. Isn't there still 150,000 soldiers in the royal city that haven't arrived in the north? Why don't we mobilize 100,000 soldiers to reinforce the southern front first, and then we can recruit more soldiers?" At this time, Boromir still did not want to use his capital. Tintinwai wanted to persuade him again, but considering the urgency of the military situation, he could only nod and say, "Yes, then we will do as Your Majesty wishes." The northern front did not have enough soldiers to begin with, and the situation forced them to send another 100,000 soldiers to the southern front. For a short period of time, the northern front would not have any reinforcements. However, General Hun's son, who was leading 50,000 troops to Suing City, didn't know about this. At this moment, he was still fantasizing about whether he could make the first contribution. There were already reports that the main force of the mercenaries this time was only around 15,000 people. The moment he received the news, Hun's son was even wondering if the news was true. Based on the previous battle results, they had already lost 100,000 soldiers. If that was the case, then what were the 100,000 people doing? He was actually beaten by more than 10,000 people to the point where he couldn't even fight back. No matter what, this time we have to turn defeat into victory. We have to make the first contribution. How about this? Order the army to speed up. Don't let the mercenaries deal a heavy blow to our army. If that happens, we won't have any advantage in numbers. Hun's son looked at the map in his hand and then looked at the speed of the army with an anxious expression. It was only a distance of 300 li, and the army had already traveled for 2 days. They hadn't even covered half of the distance. Although he was leading infantrymen, this speed was too slow. After the general gave the order, the 50,000 soldiers sped up and rushed towards Suing City. At this moment, after 7 days of chaos, Suing City finally calmed down. This was because Yang Qindong's strategy was good, using civilians to fight civilians. This was something that no one had ever done before, and no one had ever thought of it. But it worked in his hands. When the civilians of Ding City, Jiba City, Jiging City, and Chuanlong City came to Suing City to help the mercenaries with transportation, Yang Qindong gave an order to the more than 100,000 civilians who followed them. He asked them to persuade the people in the center of Suing City that as long as they surrendered, their lives would no longer be in danger. Not only that, if they were willing to work for the mercenaries, such as transporting spoils and supplies, carrying the wounded, persuading people to surrender, cleaning up the battlefield, burying the bodies of the dead soldiers, and so on, they would be paid silver. No one would feel bad about money, especially the civilians who followed the mercenaries at the beginning. They found that as long as they were obedient, the mercenaries would never beat or scold them. They would even nod when they met to show their friendliness. This was a treatment and respect that the Gilded Dynasty's army didn't give them. But now, the mercenaries gave them this treatment. Because of this, they could be respected and treated as human beings. Plus the considerable amount of silver, everyone's heart began to lean towards the mercenaries. The civilians were originally simple. They were the people who knew what was good and bad. As long as someone was good to them, they would be good to them in return. On the contrary, even if they were of the same race, if they were oppressed, they would also stand up and resist. More than 100,000 civilians received benefits from the mercenaries, and after they entered Suing City, their role was fully played. Since they were all civilians, they had more in common. Under their word of mouth, many civilians were persuaded. Some troublemakers were arrested, and the public security in the city was improved. The auxiliary soldiers also solved the problem of feeding the civilians by opening the granaries and other methods. Whether it was public security or order in Suing City, it was restored to the right track. From the moment the civilians entered the city, the chaos in the city was restored to order in just 2 days. Looking at this result, many people admired Yang Qindong even more. Beta Persei also flattered him more than once. "Young master, I admire you when it comes to fighting, but Beta Persei admires you even more when it comes to governing. It seems that there is nothing in the world that can stop you. You are really the reincarnation of an immortal. You are really..." Okay. One would vomit after listening to too much flattery. Although Beta Persei was speaking from the bottom of his heart, Yang Qindong still interrupted him and asked, "The 1st Cavalry Division and the 4th Division of the Cold Front have rested enough, right? They have rested for a long time. These days, they didn't have to worry about the things in the city. They were just resting. Haha. Young master, Division Commander Tian and Division Commander Ling have come to you several times and asked to fight." Beta Persei chuckled. "Then, young master, I will give them a chance now. Tell them that there are 50,000 enemies outside the city. How to deal with them will be up to the 2 division commanders. This young master will not participate." Yang Qindong nodded. Previously, they had conquered several cities and defeated more than 100,000 enemies. It was easy to say, but in fact, it was just a matter of speed against speed. So many soldiers didn't get a good rest. Taking advantage of the chaos in Suing City, he gave the 2 divisions enough time to rest. Now that the blade was almost sharpened, it was time to unsheath it. After Yang Qindong gave the order, the 4th Division of the Cold Front and the 1st Cavalry Division left the city after dinner. It was obvious that they were going to launch a night attack again. Due to a lack of nutrition, the ancient armies often suffered from night blindness. This caused them to be at a disadvantage when marching or fighting at night. However, the mercenaries were different. Their nutrition was always balanced. With Crimson City as their base, they didn't lack money. Not only did they not suffer from night blindness, but because of their frequent night training, they were extremely proficient in night battles. So that night, the 2 divisions, which added up to less than 15,000 people, launched a fierce counterattack against the Golden Edge army stationed 10 miles in front of Suing City. When the sound of guns and cannons rang out, the 50,000 unprepared Golden Edge army was hit hard. Although they had sent out night guards, in front of the fierce attack of the 2 elite divisions, they could not withstand a single blow. The 50,000 soldiers were defeated separately. When the next day dawned, the ground was full of their corpses, as well as all kinds of weapons and provisions thrown everywhere. It was time to use the common people again. With the addition of the 300,000 people in Suing City, more than 400,000 people rushed out and the battlefield was quickly cleaned up. Those who were slow even left the city empty-handed and returned empty-handed. This was the power of the common people. As long as they were serious and willing to work hard, there was nothing they couldn't do. 50,000 enemies were either killed or captured within a short period of time, and only about 5,000 managed to escape. 90% of them were chased down by the 2 main divisions early in the morning. In the end, less than 500 of them managed to escape. It was these people who escaped that bumped into General Hun Sen's army that was rushing to Suing City, and then the news of the front line's defeat spread. The originally valiant and high-spirited Golden Edge Army's morale was suddenly hit hard. The army had no choice but to stop 100 miles away from Suing City. In the main tent, Hun Sen was interrogating the deserters, and then his roar came from the main tent. "What? You're saying that 50,000 soldiers were wiped out in one night? And they chased you all the way without any intention of stopping?" But the news said that the other side only had about 15,000 people. How did they do it? And don't they need to clean up the battlefield? Now that the weather is warm, with so many corpses left outside, there will be a plague. Chapter 924. It was no wonder that Hun Sen did not believe them. 10,000 men could defeat 50,000 men, but what were they going to do next? The battlefield was too close to Suing City. If there were any diseases, the mercenaries would be the first to suffer. The enemy should know this. So why did they still chase after them? Did they not want to live anymore? If these deserters said that the mercenaries were only chasing after them, he might believe them. However, if they said that the entire army was chasing after them, it would not make sense. Since they were elites, they should know the importance of cleaning up the battlefield. It seemed that these deserters were not trustworthy. Just say that they are deserters and are afraid of death. Drag them out and kill them. Hun Sen waved his hand to his deputy. The situation at the front was unclear, and it was hard to say if they had really lost the battle. However, what he needed to do now was to stabilize the morale of his troops. Otherwise, how could they fight the next battle? These 100 deserters were now very regretful. They didn't die under the fierce attack of the mercenaries and didn't surrender. However, they never thought that they would die in the hands of their own people. If they knew this would happen, they would have surrendered to the mercenaries. "General, what do we do next?" Do we continue to advance? The generals at the side asked, It's already dark. Let's rest for the night. Send more scouts so that they could figure out what was going on ahead. Also, let's sleep with one eye open. Hun San thought for a moment before giving the order. After knowing that the enemy was cavalry, they set up many horse traps and stakes outside the tent to prevent sneak attacks in the middle of the night. There were even people with bows and arrows in the dark, waiting for the mercenaries to appear so that they could catch them off guard. The night passed peacefully without any signs of danger. In the morning, the scouts at the front sent back news that they were about to reach Suing City. However, they did not find any corpses left behind from the battle. As for the whereabouts of the 50,000 men, they were still searching, and there was no news for the time being. Haha. Hun San laughed heartily when he saw the report from the scout. I told you that the 50,000 soldiers in front of us would be fine. Otherwise, how could we have cleaned up the battlefield so quickly after such a big battle? Humph! I was almost killed by those cowardly deserters. Killing them would be too easy for them. Give the order for the entire army to head to Suwon City after breakfast. General, should we wait for the army there before we advance? A deputy general asked cautiously. It was understandable if one deserter said that, but more than 100 deserters said the same thing. This was suspicious. It doesn't matter. They must have taken advantage of the terrain to hide. As long as our main forces arrive, they will definitely come out. At that time, it will be time for us to counterattack. All right, inform the army to prepare to depart. Hun San said confidently. There was nothing wrong with being cautious in a battle. However, being overly cautious would be seen as cowardice. The gains would not make up for the losses. After a night's rest, the 50,000 Gold Edge elite troops set off again, heading toward Suing City, which was 100 miles away. Their movement was discovered by the scouts of the 1st Cavalry Division who were hiding in the dark. They quickly reported to their commander, Tian Hu was hiding in a valley nearby. Tian Hu laughed when he heard that the 50,000 elites of the Gold Edge dynasty were not ambushed. It seems that some people have the same idea as us. They have given up on the night attack. Yes, Lung Feng is indeed Lung Feng. They must have realized that the 50,000 enemies were the elites of the Gold Edge dynasty. Moreover, they were prepared. It would be difficult to ambush them, and they might even fall into the enemy's trap. The second commander, Lu Duo, nodded and sighed. That's right. Since everyone has made the same choice, the next attack should start soon. Brothers, we are the 1st Cavalry Division under the command of the 6th Young Master. No matter what, we can't lose to others. Our performance has been good. Now it's time to see who can take the head of Hun Senator. Are you confident? Tian, who stood up. He knew that the war was about to start. Before the war, he needed to boost the morale of his troops. On the other side of the road, the 4 divisions of Lung Feng were also ready to attack. After a night of fear, the Gold Edge army still chose to move forward. This could only mean one thing. They were not sure that the 50,000 troops in Suing City had been destroyed. Otherwise, they would have turned around and retreated. Comrades, the enemy is on the road. They don't know of our existence at this time. This is our chance. If I'm not wrong, the 1st Cavalry Division must be watching us from somewhere. They may take action at any time. Now, let us fire the first shot. In a while, all regiments and battalions will gather all the machine guns in your hands. Once the battle starts, rush forward like a hot knife through butter. Target the enemy's center. As long as we can capture or kill the enemy's commander, the enemy will fall into chaos. Then it will be our moment of victory. Division Commander Ling Deqiang summoned all the regimental commanders and battalion commanders of the 4 divisions and gave the order to prepare for battle. After the meeting, the officers returned to their respective units to make preparations. Half an hour later, when the 50,000 elite troops led by Hun Sen entered the preset ambush, a loud bugle sounded. Then, Countless soldiers in green military uniforms suddenly appeared on the ground. With machine gunners as the vanguard, they formed an attack force and rushed straight towards the enemy troops that were advancing towards Suing City. The sound of the bugle shook the sky, followed by the continuous sound of gunfire. The soldiers of Golden Rim fell to the ground one by one, like crops blown down by the wind. What's going on? In the middle of the army, Hun's son, who was riding on a tall horse, asked loudly. If one looked carefully, one could see that there was a trace of panic in his eyes. Reporting to the general, we've encountered the main force of the mercenaries on our left. They're all armed with muskets. Our brothers won't be able to hold them off for much longer. A scout reported to Hun Sr. The main force of the mercenaries? How many people can there be? We have a total of 50,000 men. Tell our brothers, don't be afraid. Just charge forward. I don't believe that their guns can kill so many of us. Hun Sen said confidently when he thought of the 50,000 men he had brought with him. As if he was afraid that his brothers would not give it their all, he added, Tell everyone that each person who kills a gun will be rewarded with 10 silver taels. The more you kill, the more you will get. There is no limit. Yes, with such a generous reward, the scout was emboldened. He agreed and turned around to pass down the order. Just as he passed down the order, the 1st Cavalry Division appeared on the other side of the road. The cavalry was like a roaring train. As soon as they appeared, they rushed into the Phnom Penh army with an unstoppable momentum. They reaped one head after another as their cavalry sabers flew in the air. They took one life after another. They were like the last straw that broke the camel's back. As soon as they appeared, the army of Phnom Penh had no way to fight back. What was more terrifying was that one of the troops was heading towards the middle of the army. Wherever they went, no one could stop them. No one could defeat them. On the other side, the 1st Regiment of the 4th Cold Front Division cooperated with them. The regiment commander, Gao Xiang, personally held a squad machine gun and constantly ran forward with his legs. Anyone who was targeted by the muzzle of the gun was shot through by the rotating bullets and fell to the ground. Gao Xiang's speed was very fast. In addition, he had charged earlier than the 1st Cavalry Division, so he was closer to the middle of Phnom Penh's army. At this time, it was no longer a question of whether they could defeat the enemy, but a question of who could take the first credit. Originally, Hun's son had intentionally left 5,000 elite soldiers behind in the middle of the army to prevent the other party from launching an attack on him. In his opinion, with these soldiers protecting him, no matter how strong the enemy was, it was impossible for them to kill him so quickly. As long as the middle of the army was fine, he could command the front and rear troops to outflank the mercenaries and win the war. Who would have thought that the mercenaries were indeed heading straight for the center of the army, but their speed and impact were simply too fast. They were so fast that the 5,000 soldiers under his command actually fell into chaos as soon as they met the enemy. Then, in the face of such powerful combat power, cowards and deserters appeared. Don't be afraid. Hold on. The front and rear troops will soon come to save us. At that time, it will be time for us to fight back. Hun's son rode on the horse and shouted loudly, trying to boost the morale of the army. As he shouted and looked around, his face suddenly became frighteningly pale. The front troops were in chaos and were fleeing in all directions. The rear troops had already separated from the middle troops. At this moment, countless soldiers had already turned around and fled. They didn't even have the courage to face the enemy. Just like that, they became deserters. In fact, whether it was the guns of the 4th Cold Front Division or the sabers in the hands of the 1st Cavalry Division, they were far from what an ordinary army could compete with. Even though they were the 50,000 elites of Phnom Penh dynasty, their morale had long been slack when bad news came from the front. Now, in the face of a strong attack, who could summon up the courage to fight? Not to mention whether it was bullets or sharp sabers, they were no match for them. What else could they do at this moment? Chapter 9:25. Seeing that the center of the army had been surrounded, there were no reinforcements. Hun's son cursed inwardly as he retreated with his soldiers. He knew that, even before the battle started, he had already lost 3 points in terms of morale. In addition, the news said that the mercenaries liked to attack at night, so he wasn't prepared. As a result, he lost the initiative, and this battle was already a lost cause. Hun's son quickly made the decision to flee and left the center of the army. If he had remained in the center of the army, it might have taken some effort to find him. However, since he had left the main force, this group of men on horseback was extremely eye-catching. Hun's son, don't run. When Gao Xiang, the regiment commander of the 4th Division's 1st Regiment, saw the general riding a horse, dressed in bright armor, and saw the large banner with the word on it, he immediately recognized the other party's identity. His eyes were bloodshot as he fiercely fired a volley of bullets forward. Soon after, a few gold-rimmed soldiers who were closer to him were hit and fell to the ground, immediately causing another group of soldiers to kneel and surrender. Bastard! Gao Xiang slapped the machine gun in his hand. He knew that he would not be able to catch up to Hun's son without a horse to ride. This great merit would fall into the hands of the 1st Cavalry Division. Hun's son could not outrun a horse. He turned around and saw that the mercenaries had been left behind. He let out a sigh of relief. Although he had lost the battle, he had at least managed to keep his life. He still had a chance to rise again. General, run. There are cavalry chasing after us. Just as Hun's son felt that he could breathe a sigh of relief, a sharp-eyed soldier beside him called out. He tilted his head and looked in another direction. Sure enough, there were a few hundred war horses galloping in his direction, closing in on him. Hong's son immediately felt his blood run cold. He clamped his legs together and lashed his horse with the horsewhip in his hand. Hong's son sped up again. Chase! That must be a big fish. The 3rd Regiment commander, Hubo, stared at the fleeing Hun's son with excitement in his eyes. Behind him, there were 2 battalions of 800 war horses following him like a shadow. The soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division were not only physically strong, but also had better knife skills than ordinary people. Even their war horses were faster than other war horses. In order to achieve such speed, these war horses usually ate fine fodder, which made their fur shine. When they ran, it was as if the gods were helping them. With one chasing the other, the distance between the 2 sides was constantly narrowing. It was already less than 300 meters away. Hun's son, who was running at the front, looked back more than once. Every time he did that, he would whip his horse with all his might so that he could run faster. However, in front of the world's number 1 Cavalry Division with top-notch equestrian skills, no matter how hard he tried, the distance between the 2 sides was still rapidly closing. From 300 meters to 250 meters to 200 meters, General, run. We'll stay and stop him. A bodyguard who had followed Hun's son for many years and had received Hun Sen's favor saw that it was not a good idea to continue. He immediately stopped and drew his sword to prepare for battle. Beside him, there were more than a dozen bodyguards who stayed behind to fight for a chance for their general to escape. These bodyguards were also good fighters. They followed Hun's son for a long time, and they usually ate and used the best food. Now it was time for them to show their strength. Each of them held a saber in their hands, ready to fight to the death with the cavalry. Perhaps they had overestimated themselves, or perhaps they had underestimated the enemy. With just a dozen cavalry, it was a joke to think that they could stop the 800 cavalrymen of the 1st Cavalry Division. Hubo! Er's eyes flashed with mockery when he saw that the enemy had left someone behind. Then he reached for the bow on his back and shot an arrow through the air. To the people of the grasslands, archery on horseback was like farming in the Central Plains. It was a skill that everyone had to know. To be able to join the 1st Cavalry Division, the soldiers had to undergo strict horse archery tests. Regardless of whether it was a fixed target or a moving target, It was a skill that was ingrained in their bones. There were only a dozen enemies. How could they stop them? The arrows were shot from afar. It was as if the arrows had grown eyes, or as if iron had encountered a magnet. The arrows steadily pierced into the dozen or so bodyguards. It was a pity that they wanted to stop the pursuers and buy time for the general to escape. But in reality, they were just fixed targets. They did not even have the chance to swing their swords. After a round of arrows, they fell to the ground one by one like hedgehogs. Hun Sun, who was turning his head, witnessed the entire scene. He couldn't help but shudder. Who the hell is this person? How could he have such exquisite archery skills? How could he defeat such an opponent? At this moment, Hun Sun felt a great sense of fear. He suddenly realized that whether it was himself or the entire Golden Border dynasty, they knew too little about mercenaries. In the past, they only thought that the enemy had very advanced firearms. But now, the enemy's cavalry was also terrifying. With such an opponent, the Golden Border dynasty's defeat was inevitable. The bodyguards left behind did not play any role in stopping the enemy. The distance between the two sides was still narrowing. Just as the distance between the two sides was getting shorter and shorter, an opportunity appeared in front of Hun Sun again. He found nearly 1,000 infantry troops. They were the rear troops of the 50,000 troops. Because of their excellent position, they escaped as soon as they found the situation was not right. Now they were caught red-handed by Hun's senator, of course. Hun Sun did not intend to punish them at this time. These people were born to be good shields and scapegoats. All of you, stop right there and attack the enemies behind you. They don't have as many people as you do. If anyone dares to run again, I will kill them immediately. Hun Sen's survival instincts made him speed up again, and his voice sounded even more anxious. More than 1,000 Golden Border soldiers, who were running away with their heads down, heard Hun Sen shout. When they looked back and saw that it was their general who was chasing after them, they all showed a gloomy expression. According to the military law of the Golden Border dynasty, escaping from a battle and being defeated in a battle were completely different. It was the difference between life and death. They thought that no one would notice them because the battlefield was in chaos. They could say that they were defeated on the battlefield. Who would know? But now they were caught red-handed by the general. It was really difficult to explain. What are you looking at? As long as you can block the pursuers for 15 minutes, you will all be meritorious. You can ask me for a reward later. After being a general for so many years, he had already seen through the mentality of the soldiers. He knew what he had to say to make these people work for him. Hun Sen's shout was tantamount to giving these soldiers hope. Since there were more than 1,000 of them, it should not be difficult to block the pursuers for 15 minutes. At that moment, the army of over 1,000 people stopped and opened up a path for Hun Sun to escape with a dozen of his personal guards. Then they crossed the road, each holding a spear or a long saber, as if they were going to fight the pursuing cavalry. Release the arrows! Seeing that the prey was about to escape, Hubo was not willing to let it go. He took the lead and shot an arrow. The arrow flew out and pierced the chest of a Golden Border soldier. The soldier, who was shouting and fighting spirit, did not even have a chance to retaliate before he was killed by the arrow. At the same time, more arrows flew out and pierced into the bodies of the gold-rimmed soldiers who were blocking the road ahead. One by one, the soldiers fell to the ground. The power of the arrows was not inferior to the fire of the flintlock. One by one, their comrades died in front of them. Most of them were killed by an arrow. This scene frightened the Golden Border soldiers behind. They thought that they could hold on for a while because of their numbers. Only after fighting did they realize how laughable their thoughts were. Retreat, retreat quickly. A Chiliarch mixed in with the soldiers, saw how powerful the cavalry was. He knew that they could not stop the enemy with their strength. Forcing them to stay here would only be throwing away innocent lives. He immediately gave the order to retreat. Some people retreated because of this, and the defensive line that the Golden Border soldiers had just set up collapsed before it could do anything. Some of the soldiers who were too slow finally ran into Hubo and the others. With a flash of swords and sabers, dozens of heads flew into the air. This shocking scene forced many of the Golden Border soldiers to kneel and surrender. Facing the unstoppable 1st Cavalry Division, they were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered, unable to retaliate at all. Hubo did not pay any attention to the kneeling Golden Border soldiers and continued to lead the cavalry forward. They passed by them and continued to chase after their target. General Hun's senator, Hun Sen, used the thousands of soldiers as a meat shield to fight for a chance of survival. Just as he was about to take a breather, a soldier beside him fell from his horse with a plop. He was so shocked that his whole body trembled. He immediately turned around to take a look. What he saw almost scared his soul out of his body. The cavalry that he had left behind had reappeared, and they were less than an arrow's distance away from him. Ah, save me! At this moment, Hun Sen was truly scared out of his wits. He did not even think about surrendering. Instead, he instinctively screamed and whipped his horse in a panic, wanting to escape. Hubo did not intend to take Hun Sen's life with his first arrow. Since he was a big fish, he naturally wanted to capture him alive. However, when he saw that Hun Sen was still struggling and trying to escape, he finally gave up the idea of capturing Hun Sen alive. Riding on the horse, he raised his bow and shot at Hun Sen's back. Chapter 9:26. The sound of something breaking through the air came from behind him. If it was in the past, Hun Sen would have been alerted, but now he was on the verge of going crazy. His war horse was galloping furiously, and he could not feel anything. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his back. Following that, he felt his energy being sapped away, and even his gaze became weak. Save. Before he died, Hun Sen did not forget to reach out towards Golden Rim City. Then, with a thud, he fell off his horse. Hun Sen was dead. Hun Sen had died in battle, and his corpse was picked up by Hubo who rushed over and carried on his horse. The army returned victorious. This time, Hubo had killed to his heart's content. He once again felt as though he had galloped through the grasslands without being defeated. This was all thanks to the 1st Cavalry Division and Yang Qindong. In this battle, they had killed over 10,000 enemies, captured 30,000, and escaped. With such a result, the combined losses of the Cold Front Division and the 1st Cavalry Division only amounted to less than 100 casualties. Soon after, Yang Qindong arrived and held a celebration. In front of the 8,000 auxiliary soldiers, 8,000 Laotian soldiers, and hundreds of thousands of civilians, he gave a great performance to the 1st Cavalry Division and the 4th Division of Lanfeng. With a wave of his hand, 5 silver carriages were pushed out. These were the rewards he had given to the 2 divisions. After chasing Hun Sen for tens of li, Hubo who had killed Hun Sen, was praised by Yang Qindong. He was awarded a 2nd-class merit medal and a gold medal. He had also become the first knight of the 1st Cavalry Division to receive such an honor. Hubo received the medal from Yang Qindong with tears in his eyes. He then thanked Yang Qindong profusely, starting from how he was a defeated general. For someone of his status, after Tua Tuabuhua's death, it should have been difficult for him to make a name for himself. However, the mercenaries did not care about your past, only your current performance. Hubo had a new lease of life, and his deeds quickly spread across the land. At the end of his speech, Hubo even thanked his teacher, Tian Hu, because it was Tian who had set his eyes on Hun Sen at the very beginning, but he had given the opportunity to chase after the enemy. Just based on this, as a subordinate, he was convinced. At the same time, this incident also demonstrated Tian Hu's general demeanor. A truly qualified general should be like Tian Hu, knowing how to give credit to his subordinates. In this way, he could also receive the gratitude and loyalty of his subordinates at the same time. The silver was distributed on the spot and delivered to the hands of every meritorious soldier. This scene was seen clearly by others. At this moment, not only the auxiliary soldiers and the Lao army were envious, but also many young men of the Golden Border dynasty who were mixed among the civilians were envious. From what Hu Bo had said, they knew that this was a defeated general who had lost many times. If such a person could be put in an important position, what did they lack? As long as he was willing to work hard, wouldn't he still have a chance? At this moment, many people began to ask if the mercenaries were still recruiting, and expressed their desire to join. When Beta Persei heard about this, he immediately reported to Yang Qindong, and then said with a look of admiration, "Young master, you're amazing. You defeated their country. But not only do they not hate you, they even want to join the army and serve you. That's because I can give them something that the Golden Border dynasty could not." Beta Persei, remember, the people are always like this. Whoever treats them well, they will get close to that person. They don't have a long history and culture, so they don't have a strong sense of nationality. As long as we can ensure that they have a good life in the future, they will not be enemies with us. Instead, they will be used by us, Yang Qindong said emotionally. For a moment, he thought about the Japanese attack on China during World War II. At that time, it was not only China that was attacked, but many nearby countries were attacked as well. However, it was proven that only the people of China continued to resist, while the surrounding countries submitted as soon as they were conquered. This was the foundation of the Han people, because they had a long history and had too many things to be proud of. They were destined to not allow the other races to be above them. This was the pride of the Han people and also Yang Qindong's pride. What he needed to do next was to continue this pride and make it even more glorious. Let's go. Leave this place for the auxiliary soldiers and the people to clean up. The main force will head to Boromian City. With a wave of his hand, they began to move forward again. In Golden Border City, the news of Hun Sen's defeat and death spread like an earthquake, causing great damage and destruction to the capital. Some of the people who were originally in favor of war began to waver, and some of the people who were in favor of peace began to gain the upper hand. After several battles, the Golden Border dynasty's 50,000 navy was destroyed, and most of them were captured. The army lost 150,000 soldiers, and the rest, except for the 100,000 soldiers who were resisting the mercenary navy in the south, had only 60,000 soldiers left in the capital. This strength was not enough to defend the capital. At this moment, the Golden Border dynasty fell into an unprecedented crisis. In the palace of the capital, King Boromir was cursing. "Where are the reinforcements from Siam and Ava? When will they arrive?" "Your Majesty, the news has been sent. They are protesting in Laos and are preparing to send troops. However, the war came too suddenly and they need time to prepare." Left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei had only been in office for a few days, but he seemed to have aged a lot. In the past few days, he had not slept much. Recruiting soldiers, setting up defenses, deploying troops, everything had to be done by him. He even had to do everything himself. People say that when a book is used, it will be used. When a country is in a life and death situation, there will be few people who can be used and few people who are loyal. Protest? Prepare? Ha ha ha. Boromir laughed wildly and shook his head. It's too late, it's too late. With the mercenary army's offensive, it would take them at most 10 days to reach the capital. Soon, the capital would be plunged into the flames of war. What would be the point of reinforcements arriving after that? Men, quickly inform the Spanish ships that we have agreed to their previous request, but they must help us drive the mercenaries out. Your Majesty. Tintinwai's body trembled when he heard this. He raised his head and looked at Boromir in disbelief. The Spanish are also ambitious. On the surface, they say that they want to rent our city, but in reality, they want to wedge a nail in our territory. They will slowly nibble away at our territory in the future. This king knows. This king knows everything. But do we have a choice now? The The Spanish threat will come later, but the mercenaries are already in front of us. If there is no other way, our country will be destroyed." Boromir's eyes were filled with tears. One was a wolf, and the other was a tiger. It was not easy for him to be sandwiched between them. But now, in order to drive the tiger away, he could only take the initiative to lead the wolf into the door. Ding Ding Wei wanted to persuade him, but he didn't know what to say. As the minister of the left and the most trusted person of the king, he wanted to solve the king's worries and do something for the dynasty. But how could he change the situation with his own strength? At this moment, he could only sigh and shake his head with a face full of regret and hatred. He hated himself for not being able to solve all of this. "Minister of the left, before the Spanish army arrives, we must defend the capital. This is our last trump card," Boromir said, as if he was exhausted. "Yes." Ding Ding Wei nodded. This time, the loss of the Gilded Dynasty was too great. If they could withstand this ordeal, the next step would be to work hard, reform vigorously, and develop business and military. In any case, they had to find ways to be strong. Otherwise, they would be beaten if they fell behind. The carrier pigeon flew out of the palace and went straight to the hands of Kamoy, the envoy of the dynasty who had been staying in the Spanish warship. Looking at the imperial edict written by the king, Kamoy's face showed a painful expression. Then he quickly sorted out his thoughts and adjusted himself to the best state. He strode toward the main cabin of the warship, not far away. Miguel, the special envoy and naval general appointed by King Juan II of Spain, was chatting with Vice Admiral Cruz in the cabin. The content of their conversation was naturally the current situation. At this time, the Kingdom of Spain and the Kingdom of Portugal were Western powers. There were no hegemonic countries such as the United States, so they represented hegemony. Although the future Queen Isabel was only 3 years old, and it was impossible for her to marry Fernando, the Prince of Aragon, and the two kingdoms of Castile and Aragon had yet to be united through marriage, Spain was already very powerful and prosperous at this time. Just like Portugal, they followed the mercenary ships across the Pacific Ocean and came to the Eastern world. They discovered civilized human beings here decades ago, and at the same time their ambitions began to be exposed. As a special envoy, General Miguel soon became addicted to the Eastern world after discovering it. He found that the silk, porcelain, tea, and so on here were all things that the Western world did not have and were in short supply. He found that there were too many novel things here, various goods in the Crimson City. He found that the weapons here were very backward, and they were still swords from the cold weapon era. They were far inferior to the guns and cannons they use now. After discovering too many things, his selfishness also became inflated. The idea of wanting to use good things for himself was suddenly born. His eyes naturally fell on the weak dynasty of gold. Through understanding, Miguel found that although the strength of the countries in the Eastern world was average, they had a large population. It was almost impossible to dominate with the 20 warships and 2,000 soldiers he brought. If he wanted to gain a foothold here, the first step was to occupy a place and use it to slowly expand and develop. Chapter 9:27. With this idea in mind, Miguel got in touch with the Golden Border dynasty. In order to let the other party see his strength, he deliberately sold them 200 firearms. After earning a lot of money, the other party's attitude towards them became warmer. They even sent a messenger, Kamoy, to negotiate with them. The two sides negotiated. Everything else was easy to discuss, including bringing back the goods from here to the Western world. They could also sign a long-term contract to supply firearms and so on. For this, the Golden Rim dynasty was also willing to pay a large sum of money. However, when it came to renting a city to them, Kamoy directly refused. Kamoy said, "The Gilded Dynasty is a country with complete sovereignty and territory. It is impossible for them to rent out a city. This is a provocation to the royal family. The king, ministers, and the people will not tolerate it." The negotiations had to stop. Just as Miguel was still thinking about how to persuade Quemoy, the war suddenly broke out. A ship with a 5-star flag suddenly sailed into the port of the Goldilocks dynasty and began to disembark after a series of bombardments. Everything happened so quickly that by the time Miguel got the news and sent Deputy General Cruz to check on the situation, everything had already been settled. Because of this, Curlets did not have the chance to see the moment when the mercenary navy showed off their power. This sowed the root of their destruction not long after. The port of the Golden Border dynasty was opened by the mercenary military force, so there was no need for peace talks. Miguel decided to wait and see. He wanted to see who won and who lost, and how he would benefit from it. He did not have to wait too long. Before the war was over, Quemoy appeared and expressed that their king was willing to rent a seaside city to the Spanish navy. He did not even want any reward. He only asked them to drive the mercenary ships out of the sea. In the previous negotiations, Special Envoy Miguel bragged more than once about how powerful their navy is, how terrifying the power of their artillery is, and so on. In short, they described themselves as invincible in the world. Quemoy came with the intention of King Boromir, which made Envoy Miguel very happy. However, he didn't agree immediately because, in his eyes, mercenaries were a better partner. The other party had more novel goods. Now that the Golden Rim dynasty was in danger and was about to be occupied by the mercenaries, why not have a good talk with the mercenaries? In such a sensitive period, he might get more benefits. He only said that he needed to think about it and sent Quemoy away. Then Envoy Miguel called his Deputy General, Cruz, and asked him to talk to the mercenaries on his behalf. However, this time, the cities they rented had increased from 1 to 3. Miguel's learning ability was very strong. During this period of time, he learned that Eastern businessmen always liked to bargain when talking about things. Sometimes the asking price might be a frightening amount, but the real transaction price would be very low. When he first came here, he had suffered a lot because of this. Now that he had experience, he wanted 3 cities. In his opinion, even if he couldn't reach an agreement, he could still negotiate. At least 2 cities shouldn't be a problem. But he didn't know that it was impossible for the mercenaries to negotiate with them about territorial issues. His approach was just asking for trouble. Cruz, who received the order, came to the port of Gombo in a warship disguised as a merchant ship. But what he didn't expect was that his ship wasn't approved. In desperation, he had to drive a small boat into the port and saw Long Yuntian, the commander of the 1st Marine Army's 3rd Division, who was commanding the overall situation here. With Yang Qindong's words, Long Yuntian was not only no longer the acting head, but also the commander of the 3rd Division. His gratitude was needless to say. He had already made up his mind to follow the 6th young master for a lifetime. At this time, he was commanding the 4th Marine Division to cooperate with the 6th young master's attack from the north. The Marine Cold Front was a dragon on the sea and a tiger on land. They were powerful. Although the Golden Rim dynasty sent 100,000 troops to support them, they didn't gain any advantage in the hands of Long Yuntian. They completed the orders of the 6th young master very well and destroyed the 50,000 Marines of the Golden Rim dynasty and captured most of the enemy. Long Yuntian was in a good mood these days because he also restrained the other side's 100,000 Marines. He received a report from the soldiers that a Spanish general wanted to see him. With curiosity and a good mood, the two sat together face to face in a courtyard in the port of Gombo. Cruz had a typical Westerner's face, white skin and blue eyes. But Long Yuntian, who often walked on the sea, saw many people like him, so he didn't care. He politely invited the other party to drink tea and even handed him a cigarette to show his hospitality. The reason why the mercenaries were so powerful in the end, in addition to Yang Qindong's ideas that played a big role in it, it was because of the commercial development. It was precisely because they had money that they had an invincible army and that they could roam freely in any place. Long Yuntian thought that the other party wanted to do business with him, which could be regarded as a merit. So he greeted the other party warmly. Unexpectedly, The expectation was too different from what he imagined. The other party actually wanted to rent a seaside city and asked for 3 at once. He also deliberately pointed out that the mercenaries and the Golden Rim dynasty were in a stalemate, and the Golden Rim dynasty had agreed to their request to rent a city. The indirect meaning was very obvious. The Golden Rim dynasty agreed. If the mercenaries didn't agree, then the next course of action for the Spanish warships was very clear. Damn, only 20 warships, and they are so arrogant. They don't want to live. After hearing the other party's request, Long Yuntian's face showed an angry look. The translator sent by the first Red Nest Academy didn't speak. He knew that some words couldn't be translated casually. What did he say? Cruz looked at the translator puzzled. Although he didn't understand Chinese, he could see that Long Yuntian's expression seemed to be a bit wrong, and his mood seemed to be a little bad. Division Commander Long said that he can't decide on this matter and needs to ask for instructions from above. The translator had no choice but to find an excuse with a smile. Well, then we'll wait for you to make a decision, but please hurry up. Our warships are parked not far away. As long as you agree, we can immediately provide artillery support to help you repel the soldiers of the Golden Rim dynasty. Cruz said proudly. At this moment, it was as if he could dominate the battle with a single move. Okay. The interpreter nodded with a smile, then conveyed Kurlet's message to Long Yuntian. At the end, he added some words of his own. Commander Long, you should ask the dean before making a decision on this matter. Well, yes, ask the 6th young master. Long Yuntian nodded and agreed. He asked the translator to arrange a place for Cruz to rest. He went to the telegraph room and reported what happened here. The telegram was quickly sent to Yang Qindong. After reading it, his face was as calm as water, but the movements of his hands had completely exposed his thoughts. The telegram was tightly clenched into a ball by his right hand. Beta Persei telegram. Beta Persei, who rarely saw the 6th young master angry, immediately took out his pen and paper. At the same time, he felt sad for some people. Although he didn't know what the telegram was about, provoking the young master was no different from provoking the king of hell. The telegram was sent out and quickly reached Long Yuntian's hands. Looking at the telegram in his hand, his expression was first surprised, then excited, and then dignified. Then he shouted, "Come, invite that Spanish Deputy General over." 3 hours later, Deputy General Cruz reappeared on the Spanish warship and reported the whole negotiation to the envoy Miguel. Oh, did they agree? Miguel's face revealed a hint of surprise. Yes, General. Not only did they agree, but they also fully satisfied our requirements. They will give us 3 cities as a foothold. Haha, in fact, this is easy to figure out. These territories are not theirs to begin with. Naturally, they won't feel bad about giving them away. Of course, they also made 2 requests. Cruz smiled and took out the contract he signed with Long Yuntian. What are the requests? Miguel asked. First, find out the military headquarters of the Goldilocks dynasty in the south and then destroy them. Second, hand over the messenger of the Goldilocks dynasty, Kamoy, to them. When Cruz said these 2 requests, there was no strange look on his face. Not only him, but even Miguel also did not show a curious look. It was probably because these 2 requests were nothing to him at all. Or perhaps this was an opportunity for them to show their strong combat power. It was a way to show off their means. Okay, agree to them. This time, we will use this opportunity to attack the people of the Goldilocks dynasty and let the mercenaries see our strength. In this way, let's see if they dare to be dishonest when dealing with us in the future. Yes, General. Should I invite Kamoy over? Kurletz had a sinister smile on his face. Kamoy, who was locked in the room, was still anxiously waiting for Miguel's answer. This time, in order to solve the siege of the capital, the king even agreed to give up the land and the city. This showed that the capital was already very dangerous. Now, he only hoped that Miguel would agree to his request quickly. In the long wait, every passing minute was a torture for him. Finally, there was a knock on the door, and Cruz's voice came out. "Mr. Messenger, our general wants to see you." Chapter 928. Camoy met Miguel again as he wished, and then got a very satisfactory result. The other party agreed to the deal and proposed to meet with their commanding general to discuss how to deal with the mercenaries. Although the number of reinforcements was only 2,000, they all had guns, and the Spanish warships also had cannons, which were not available in the Golden Border dynasty. Once used well, it could play a role in a surprise attack, and it was not impossible to reverse the situation of the war. Camoy left happily, and when he returned to the ship a day later, he brought the news that the southern command of the Golden Border dynasty agreed to the alliance. Soon afterward, the 2,000 Spanish troops disembarked and left behind Camoy's messenger. Then Long Yuntian received the information sent by Kurletz, and the first and second groups set off. An unfathomable but chaotic battle began. Miguel led Kurletz to attack the command center of the southern army of the Golden Border dynasty with 2,000 flintlock soldiers. Then the main force of the Navy's Cold Front Division suddenly appeared, surrounded the place, destroyed their command system, and shot the commander. At first glance, it looked as if the mercenaries were working together with the Spanish army. But suddenly, the mercenaries opened fire at the unprepared Spanish army, who were about to enjoy the fruits of their victory. Finally, High's 3rd Division showed their strength. Both sides were using flintlocks, but one side was using flintlocks that were slightly more advanced than the Ming dynasties, while the other side was using a more powerful, long-range, and accurate rifle. Before the battle had even begun, the victor had already been decided. After a chaotic battle, Miguel, Kurletz, Camoy, and others were captured. It was the so-called mantis, Stalks the silkworm, unaware of the oriole behind. The Spanish army, Camoy, and others were used and became captives in the hands of the mercenaries. Also captured were 20 warships belonging to the Spanish. They were occupied by the 4th Sea Division, and then the warships went straight to the harbor of Chimay City. The southern command of the Golden Border dynasty was destroyed, and the 100,000 troops were leaderless. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the 4th Sea Division launched a full army charge. The army was defeated in the chaos, and the southern defense line was broken. All of this was Yang Qindong's strategy, using the Spanish army to defeat the southern army of the Golden Border dynasty. Judging from the results, the process was not complicated, but it was complicated to have the courage to attack the Spanish. In other people's eyes, they definitely wouldn't act rashly without knowing the details. However, in Yang Qindong's eyes, all of this was nothing. First, he made use of the other party's belief in the contract to make them fight for him. After that, he immediately sent out troops to encircle and annihilate them. Now, it seemed that the plan was well thought out, and the result was successful. As for whether Spain would send people to cause trouble for him in the future, sorry. Even if they didn't come looking for trouble, Yang Qindong would still fight them. To him, it was only a matter of time. This time it was just an appetizer. The defeat on the southern front was like adding hail to snow. The Golden Rim dynasty was completely in a passive position. At this moment, the 4th Army Division, led by Yang Qindong and the 1st World Cavalry Regiment, had successfully occupied the eastern city of Borromean. At this point, they were only separated from the capital by Dakmeo City. It was no exaggeration to say that the Golden Rim city of the Golden Rim dynasty had appeared in front of the mercenaries. It was only a matter of time before they captured it. In the capital of Golden Rim City, when the news came, the entire capital was in chaos. Countless merchants and people wanted to escape from the war. There were even many family members of the officials among them. Left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei, who had long predicted this, gave a death order. The 4 cities were closed. Even if they were trapped in the city and died, no one was allowed to escape. It was not that Ding Dingwei was ruthless. It was just that such a chaotic situation was likely to give the mercenaries a chance to enter the city. If that was the case, they would lose their last chance to negotiate with the mercenaries. Once the royal family was destroyed, Ding Dingwei would become the biggest sinner. The royal palace was no longer as high-spirited as before. Whether it was King Boromir, left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei, or Dagon, who was the general of the city's defense, they all looked very disheveled at this moment. Everyone looked much older and more haggard. What's the situation in the city? Is there any news from the Allies' reinforcements? Boromir was still sitting on the throne, but at this moment his eyes were listless and his body was weak. The 4 gates are closed. No one is allowed to leave the city. The situation is still stable. The food in the city is enough for at least 3 months. As for the Allies' reinforcements, they said that they are still preparing. They want us to hold on for 1 more month, no matter what. Left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei said these words weakly. He knew in his heart that the Golden Rim dynasty was finished. 1 month. Boromir sneered. The mercenaries' progress was so fast that not only did they catch him off guard, but also the Allies. Since that was the case, there was no need to rely on them. His gaze moved from Ding Dingwei to General Dagon. If we defend Golden Rim City to the death, can we hold on for a month? Dagon looked troubled. Your Majesty, I'm afraid it's difficult. But I and the 60,000 soldiers in the city will not retreat. At this moment, Dagon showed the calm side of a general in the face of death. This made Boromir feel relieved. However, there was no hope in resisting. What was the point of it? At most, more people would die. Report. At this moment, a messenger ran in from outside the hall. He knelt on the ground and looked at King Boromir. He lowered his head and said nervously, Your Majesty, news just came from the front lines. Darkmouth City has opened its gates and surrendered. The main force of the mercenaries is coming to the royal city. Ha 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 ha. Boromir laughed when he heard the news. Then he smashed the crown that symbolized his status as a king on the ground. Surrender? Surrender? Could it be that this prince has mistreated them? Why don't they even have the courage to resist? Why? Ding Dingwei saw Boromir roaring like a madman and repeatedly said, Your Majesty, take care of yourself. Okay, you don't have to persuade me. My days are numbered. Boromir shook his head. After a long while, he looked at Ding Dingwei and said in an extremely weak voice, Since that is the case, let's negotiate with them and surrender. After saying this, Boromir seemed to have exhausted all his strength. Then he plopped back on the throne and waved his hand repeatedly. He wanted Ding Dingwei and Dagon to make the decision. The 2 civil and military officials wanted to say some words of comfort, but they felt that anything they said would be useless. They cupped their hands and left. Instead of saying anything, they might as well do what they were about to do. At the very least, they had to seek some benefits for their king through negotiations. They had to take advantage of the fact that they could still defend the royal city and make some demands. Right Minister Du Ci's residence was heavily guarded by soldiers. No matter how chaotic the royal city was, this place was still as peaceful as before. No one could disturb this place. Skylark's residence was the best protection. This was the backup plan that Boromir had left for himself. It had only been 20 days since the start of the war, but the situation had already turned upside down. Things had remained the same, but people had changed. Left Minister Ding Dingwei and General Dagon appeared in the Right Minister's residence together. The former Right Minister, Dagon, tactfully avoided meeting them. Ever since he agreed to go to court with Skylark, he was destined to retire from politics and enter business. Seeing that he was about to get what he wanted, he would naturally think of a way to facilitate this peace negotiation. In an extremely elegant and remote courtyard, the 3 of them met. Yunk was still as calm as ever. Even when Ding Dingwei and En came together, he didn't give them a second glance and continued to brew his tea. However, there were 2 chairs placed in front of him, indicating that he had already prepared everything. This place is really peaceful. I didn't expect Mr. Yin to be so calm when the outside world is so chaotic. It is truly admirable. Ding Dingwei looked at the surroundings and said emotionally, "Don't worry. King Boromir can also live such a peaceful life in the future. As long as he doesn't want to, he can refuse to see any guests." At this moment, the tea was ready. Skylark poured a cup for each of the guests and pointed to the chairs in front of him. "Thank you." Ding Dingwei and Dagon looked at each other and sat down together. The negotiation officially began. "If we choose to surrender now, I don't know how the Duke of Loyalty is going to treat my king and the ministers." Ding Dingwei took a sip of tea and went straight to the point. "The king will be put under house arrest, and the other ministers will hand over half of their property. They will then be transformed into ordinary people. Of course, if anyone wants to serve the Duke of Loyalty, they can also submit an application. We will make appropriate arrangements according to their ability." Skylark quickly answered. He had studied these matters repeatedly over the years and already knew what to do. Skylark's answer was not out of Ding Dingwei's expectations. As far as he knew, the king of Jiaoji and the king of Lansong Kingdom were also treated the same way. However, he didn't expect it to be the Golden Bian dynasties turned so soon. Thinking about it, it was as if everything happened yesterday, although he knew that things should be done this way. Since it was a peace negotiation, of course, he had to strive for more conditions that were beneficial to him. Ding Dingwei immediately said, "I still have 60,000 soldiers in the capital, and I still have the ability to fight. My king is not a defeated king. It seems a bit unreasonable to still have the same conditions." "Oh, you still have 60,000 soldiers?" Skylark seemed to be interested and raised his head. Chapter 9:29. "Yes, we still have 60,000 soldiers. They are all elites, and they can fight against many on the battlefield. We are really—" General Dagon wanted to continue his introduction. Unexpectedly, Skylark opened her mouth and said, "They're just chickens and dogs. If you're not convinced, you can fight. The mercenaries can easily destroy them with less than 10,000 men. Do you believe me?" Skylark's calm aura changed as his gaze landed on Din's body, becoming a little sharper. Dagon, who was being stared at, wanted to say no and shake his head. However, he knew that the people were in chaos and the morale of the army was low. The so-called 60,000 soldiers were just a number. If they really faced the mercenaries, they would definitely lose. Ding Dingwei sighed in his heart. He knew that his idea of using the army as a bargaining chip had failed. He also knew that they were meat on the chopping block. They had lost the right to speak and the right to make conditions. Yunk seemed to have noticed that Ding Dingwei was past his prime. He took out a telegram and placed it on the table. As the general of Chuanlong City, Hamo should have defended the city to the death and waited for reinforcements. However, not only did he not do so, he did not protect the people under his rule. Instead, he set his horse on fire, causing tens of thousands of people in the city to be injured and killed. Not only that, you even put the blame on the mercenaries. Now that Hamo has been captured, he has told the truth. Soon, the truth will be revealed to the world. As an envoy, Hamo did not refuse the unreasonable request made by the Spanish army. Instead, he agreed to cede a city in exchange for benefits and asked them to send troops to deal with the mercenaries. This is clearly an act of dividing the country. He is a sinner of the Golden Border dynasty. Now that he has been captured by the mercenaries, he has confessed everything he has done. Both of you martial artists do not think about war, and scholars do not think about remonstrances. Do you think there is any hope for the Golden Border dynasty, even if it survives? Since he could no longer display his brilliance in Boromov's hands, it would be better for him to hand over his power and let us, the Duke of Faithfulness, change them. Just like Laos and Vietnam, the government is now harmonious, the economy is developing rapidly, and the people are living the life they want. Isn't that good? Isn't that what a subject wants to see? Skylark pointed at two things and spoke in a strict tone, forcing Ding Ding Wei and En to lower their heads involuntarily. Yes, there were indeed a lot of internal problems in the Golden Bien dynasty. To solve this problem, it was not just a matter of money, but a fundamental change was needed. This could only be done by mercenaries. Facts also proved that in the areas they ruled, the lives of the people were indeed higher than other forces. Otherwise, there would not be people of the Golden Border dynasty who had escaped, and the Golden Border army would not have sealed the border, which eventually led to the end of the war. King Boromir was a despicable person. Even now, the silver in the treasury had not been touched. The recruitment of new soldiers was only halfway done. Who could say that the current state of the Gilded Dynasty was not caused by this king? The two civil and military officials lowered their heads, at this moment, speechless. They really did not know what to say. On the other hand, Skylark's stern expression disappeared in an instant. She regained her calm expression and said, "The Duke of Loyalty has already sent an order. Boromir must step down and leave this place. He must rush to another place where he is under house arrest. Of course, his safety is guaranteed. Not only that, but the two of you as loyal subjects have a chance to see him once a year. It can be regarded as doing your duty as a subject. Oh, by the way, to do this, the two of you must stay and continue to do something for the Golden Bien dynasty. Otherwise, you will not have such qualifications. Stay?" Both Ding Ding Wei and En were stunned. They did not understand what Skylark meant. "Yes, stay. This is the Duke of Loyalty's order. Now that the Golden Bien dynasty has been established, there are many things to be done. The two of you know the situation here better. Recently, your performance has also proved your ability and your character. The Duke of Loyalty admires this very much, so he asked you to stay. In the future, the Golden Bien dynasty will no longer exist, and it will be renamed Cambodia Province. Dan will be the garrison general here, responsible for the reconstruction of the army and the security of the province. Ding Ding Wei will be the deputy governor, responsible for the people's livelihood and economic development here." When it came to Ding Ding Wei, Young's face showed a trace of envy and said, "The position of deputy governor is already very high. It's not even lower than your current position of left prime minister. This shows how much importance the Duke of Loyalty values you." Skylark's sudden words were indeed beyond the two's expectations. They only wanted to be loyal to King Boromir, who had given them a lot of kindness. They did not expect to be chosen by the Duke of Loyalty. For a moment, they did not know how to answer. However, Ding Ding Wei was accustomed to storms and waves. After a moment of hesitation, he replied, "What if we don't agree?" "The Duke of Loyalty will not force anyone. If the two of you do not agree, you can enjoy the same treatment as the other ministers. However, I still suggest that the two of you stay. After all, we have persevered until now, not only because of Boromir, but also because of the people and the army." The Duke of Loyalty said that as long as the two of you stay, there will be no problem with the funds. As long as the expenses are reasonable, he will approve. Not only that, but the treasury left behind by Boromir will also be left in Cambodia Province. After the war, there are many things waiting to be done. The people are in a terrible situation. If we want their standard of living to catch up, or even catch up with Laos and Vietnam, we will need to invest a lot of money. This is a good opportunity. I personally think that only the two of you understand the situation here. With the two of you, the people here will suffer less, and they will not be bullied. If it was someone else, everything would be different. Although Yunk said that Yang Chindong would not force anyone, what he meant was that they should stay and ask them in the name of the people. This was Yang Chindong's intention. History had proven that the method of controlling the barbarians with the barbarians was effective. Since that was the case, why should he give up what was near and seek what was far away? He only needed to arrange the position of a provincial governor to oversee the overall situation. As for the other cadres, he still needed to keep some of the old ministers. This way, he could save a lot of time to understand and work together. Ding Ding Wei and En listened attentively. Their hearts were already somewhat moved. Yunk had already said that the treasury would not be taken away, and the Duke of Loyalty would invest more money. In this way, with the idea that money made the world go round, the future Phnom Penh dynasty it should be said that the future of Cambodia province was still promising. Both of them were not too old, and they also wanted to do something. Now that the era of Boromir had passed, even if it was for the sake of the future generations, they should do well. After this incident, the relationship between Yunk and the other two seemed to be a lot closer. When the two of them negotiated, they began to set out from the perspective of how to rebuild Cambodia province. Naturally, everything went according to their wishes. For days later, on the 31st day of the mercenaries' counterattack on the first blockade in Shanding City, the negotiation ended. On behalf of the mercenaries, Yunk accepted the surrender letter from King Boromir of the former Phnom Penh dynasty. From the beginning to the end, it only took a month. Although there was still a lot of work to be done after this, the speed at which the armed forces of a kingdom were disarmed was still shocking. Yang Chindong had said before that he would solve the problem of the Phnom Penh dynasty by force in 1 to 2 months. Now he had done it, and it was done with the best standards. This made Luan Shaoqin, the governor of Laos, who was in charge of logistics, feel less pressure. In order to restrain Siam and Ava from sending troops to help the Phnom Penh dynasty, Luan Shaoqin first gave the merchants of the two countries a tax reduction and discounts on goods and other benefits to show their friendship. It turned out that this trick was indeed very effective. When the news of the war came, the Phnom Penh dynasty sent people to seek military support from the two allies. These merchants made a lot of obstacles, which slowed down the speed of the two countries' troops. Now that the Phnom Penh dynasty had changed its name to Cambodia province, their army still had not been assembled. Without external interference, now that the war was over, Siam and Ava had no reason to send troops. While they had to swallow this bitter fruit, they also began to strengthen their armaments because they had a feeling that the rapidly developing mercenary army would not let them stay. One day, they would be eaten up like the Phnom Penh dynasty. For this reason, the kings of the two countries reached a private agreement that no matter which country was attacked in the future, the other country must unconditionally provide support. This was originally for their own survival. The spies of the Security Bureau and the CIA buried in the two countries reported this news to Yang Chindong. He just glanced at it and threw it aside. What he needed to do now was to stabilize the situation in Cambodia. It was true that he did not have more strength to conquer other countries. It was not that he did not have enough soldiers to conquer these two small countries, but that he did not have enough manpower to occupy and manage them. Not to mention, as soon as the war started, Bai Ming and Nan Ming had already taken action. Chapter 930. As more and more Han people entered the grassland's first city, and these Han people were sent there after being trained in Chichen City, the spies of the northern and southern Ming went there one after another, using various means to extract information from these people. Yang Chindong was the leader of the mercenaries, and the fact that Chichen City was his headquarters was basically known to the whole world. This time, Yang Chindong took the initiative to attack the Phnom Penh dynasty, which made the northern and southern Ming feel a strong sense of crisis. So they also learned from him and took the initiative to start the expansion journey. For example, the southern Ming took the initiative to send an army to approach the sphere of influence of the king of Min Zhuang. Bai Ming also began to mobilize an army to rush to Datong Mansion and Xian Mansion. They wanted to launch a pincer attack on the Walla leader Yes Hen in the Hetao area. The situation suddenly became tense because of this. Yang Chindong also ordered the commander of Tiger's Man in the first city to keep an eye on Bai Ming's every move. Once they found out that they had bad intentions, they should not be soft-hearted or afraid. When the enemy attacked, they just had to deal with them properly. While the first city was ready to defend, Yang Qindong also sent a telegram to the general of Yunnan province, Hongjin, to send troops to Liangshan. He wanted to show his presence in front of the forces of Bai Ming and the king of Minzhuang, and also indirectly warn both sides to be careful of his existence as a fisherman. In terms of original intention, Yang Qindong did not want to see the southern Ming unify the south. A strong and complete southern Ming was not what Yang Qindong wanted to see now. What he wanted to see was a serious internal friction in the southern Ming, which would play a better role in promoting his presence there in the future. No matter how chaotic the situation outside was, Yang Qindong's eyes were still on the newly established Cambodia province. When the capital, Phnom Penh City, also opened its door and surrendered, and King Boromir was secretly sent to Chichen City, the previously prepared 340,000 people also went down the Mekong River. Among the 340,000 people, there were Han people in Chichen City, Mongols in the first city, and foreigners in Laos and Yunnan province. Yang Qindong adopted the method of mixing sand to reduce the proportion of the original residents. However, in the face of Cambodia, which had a population of 4 million people, a mere 300,000 people could not solve any fundamental problems, which was also what troubled him the most recently. Sun Xiaoguang was one of the cadres that Yu Qian, the governor of Chichen City, valued highly. When he was less than 40 years old, he was found to have the ability to manage and see the overall situation. He began to be put in an important position and participated in the construction of Chichen City. This time, when Yang Qindong asked Yu Qian for him, he was entrusted with an important position and became the first governor of Cambodia province. At this time, he was standing in the palace of Phnom Penh City, reporting to Yang Qindong about his work and some of the difficulties he was facing now. Governor's son, leave a quarter of the palace as my office in the future. You can rebuild the rest of the place into a commercial street. Compared to the special geographical location of Cambodia province, this place will become an important base for the business of the sea route. If it is done well, the business here will be very promising. This can also make this place a place to generate tax. You must seize the opportunity. Looking at Sun Xiaoguang, Yang Qindong gave advice on the local conditions. Yes, sixth young master, Xiaoguang understands. Sun Xiaoguang replied in a deep voice. Although in terms of age he was much older than Yang Qindong, it did not prevent him from admiring the sixth young master. Perhaps in the entire Chichen City, there was no one who did not respect the sixth young master who had brought them everything they had today. Compared to Laos and Vietnam province, Cambodia's territory is not very big. It should be easier to manage. I will see your performance. By the way, do you have any difficulties? Feel free to tell me. If I can solve it, I will help you. Yang Qindong spoke again. This time, he met Sun Xiaoguang not only to encourage him in his work, but also to help him solve practical problems. Everything was ready. Logically speaking, Sun Xiaoguang only needed to develop slowly according to the plan. It was only a matter of time before changes and gains were made. However, since he had the opportunity to make a request, he would not miss it. Sixth young master, if it's possible, can you move some of the people here away? You said just now that Cambodia's territory is not very big, but it has a large population. With such a large population base, according to the previous regulations, the land is not enough to be distributed. You can't expect everyone to go into business, right? Although some factories will be built here in the future, it will still take time. During this time, many people will have nothing to do. I am worried that as time goes by... Tell me, how many people do you think it is appropriate to move? Yang Qindong waited for Sun Xiaoguang to report the data. When he opened his mouth, he went straight to the heart of the problem. Half. If you can move half of the population, I can guarantee that everyone here will have something to do. The situation will be completely stable, and the speed of development in the future will be good. Finally, Sun Xiaoguang seized the opportunity and demanded an exorbitant price. He wanted to move 2 million people. 2 million! Yang Qindong did not expect Sun Xiaoguang's request to be so high. However, when he thought that Sun Xiaoguang was doing it for work, he did not refuse. Instead, he quickly nodded and said, "Okay, I will think of a way." Originally, he wanted to bargain, but he did not expect that the sixth young master would agree. Sun Xiaoguang was very happy and nodded repeatedly to express his gratitude. "You don't have to thank me. You are doing this to do a good job. I can find a way to move 2 million people out for you. But you have to remember that once this place is restored to its original state, there will still be outsiders who want to move in. At that time, you're not allowed to talk about conditions and difficulties." Yang Qindong gave a warning in advance. "Sixth young master, don't worry. I know." Sun Xiaoguang stood at attention and promised. Now that Cambodia was just established, it needed the help of others. In the future, when they became stronger, they would naturally help other regions. Sun Xiaoguang was very clear about this. Not long after, Sun Xiaoguang left happily, leaving Yang Qindong standing there looking at the map with his brows furrowed. Looking at his current forces, needless to say, Chichen City was the place where the Han people gathered. People from Cambodia were not qualified to go there, so they could be excluded. Shur City had the smallest population, about 200,000. However, it was not rich in resources, so it was difficult to be self-sufficient. Therefore, he could not send a large number of people there. Vietnamese province already had a population of 3 million. It was not impossible to accommodate more people, but it would only increase the burden there. The same was true for Lao province, which had a population of 3 million. It also needed development, but it could not absorb more people. Since these forces could not do it, he could not throw the 2 million people that Sun Xiaoguang proposed to move into the sea. Wait, see. Yang Qindong's mind flashed an idea in an instant. Then his eyes fell on the sea. In a few breaths, layers of ideas formed in his mind. Then he punched the place marked on the map as Luzon Island with a smile in his eyes. In ancient times, Luzon Island was a small country called Luzon. Since the Song and Yuan dynasties, China's merchant ships often came here to trade. China's ancient books called it Little Luzon. There were special articles in the East and Western studies and Ming history, foreign biographies. In the third year of the Ming Yongle dynasty, 1405, the eunuch of the Three Guarantees, Zhang He, led a huge fleet to Luzon. He was appointed as the governor of Luzon by the Yongle emperor. He was in charge of the country's politics, economy, military, and culture. He served for 20 years, 1405 to 1424. During this period, Su spared no effort to promote the Chinese culture. He implemented the rule of Confucianism and benevolence. He spread the advanced technology of agriculture, fishing, industry, and commerce in southern Min. He promoted shipbuilding, textile, pottery, tea, and other industries, making outstanding contributions to the social stability, economic development, and cultural prosperity of Luzon. Today, Luzon Island was still considered one of the vassal states of the great Ming dynasty. After the north and south were clearly separated, their strength was greatly reduced. In addition, they had forbidden the sea for many years. They had lost their original deterrence to Luzon Island. Luzon Island had become an isolated place, so why not occupy it for their own use? In fact, in 1450, the Arab merchant Said Abu Bakr had already established an Islamic regime in the southern part of Luzon Island. In the future, history would call this place the Philippines. Now, they were only building their own forces on the southern island. Once they had a firm foothold, even if they didn't take over Luzon Island, other forces would also be tempted. Since that was the case, why should he be polite? The only thing he needed to worry about was that once the news of occupying Luzon Island spread back to the Ming dynasty, would it affect the current relationship between the two sides? After all, Luzon Island was not far from the Ming dynasty. The previous governor was appointed by the Ming dynasty. If the news of the mercenaries occupying Luzon Island spread back, there would definitely be ministers who would raise doubts and bring trouble. Yang Qindong was not afraid of trouble, but it was always good to avoid trouble. Suddenly, Yang Qindong thought of something and asked Beta Persei, who was standing next to him. Beta Persei, I remember that we seem to have captured 20 large and medium-sized warships from Spain, right? Yes, young master. Those warships are very different from our warships. They have been sent to the shipyard in Cheng City for research. Beta Persei didn't know what was going on, but he still answered truthfully. Very good. Send a telegram to Commander Gao Xiong immediately. Tell him that I want to see him and ask him to come quickly. Yang Qindong nodded. Learning from each other's strengths to make up for one's weaknesses was what he taught the technicians in Cheng City. They were able to combine it with reality, which made him very pleased. Of course, he was even happier about the great use these 20 warships would bring to him. Beta Persei sent the telegram. 3 days later, Commander Gao Xiong rushed all the way from the sea to the port of Kampot. Then he rode all the way to the palace of Cambodia and saw Yang Qindong. Chapter 931. As soon as the two sides met, Yang Qindong pointed to the Luzon Island area on the sand table and asked Gao Xiong, "How is it? Do you have the confidence to conquer this place in one bite?" Gao Xiong, who looked at the sand table, was surprised. Luzon Island? Yes, it's Luzon Island. Yang Qindong nodded in agreement. Gao Xiong did not answer immediately. Instead, he thought for a moment before replying. "Sixth young master, our people have landed on this island more than once. We're very clear about the situation inside. Their defense is very weak. There's no problem in taking them down. However, there are many Han people there, and they have a close relationship with the great Ming dynasty. If we attack them, I'm afraid." Gao Xiong did not continue, but the meaning was very clear. If they attacked Luzon Island, it would cause dissatisfaction from the great Ming dynasty. Now, all the supply and demand of the first city had to pass through the land of Ming. Once the relationship was strained, there would be no benefits between them. It doesn't matter. Times have changed. With our current strength, we can't launch an attack on the southern Ming dynasty, but we can still wipe out some of the forces in the periphery. Besides, this time we don't have to use the banner of mercenaries. You know that your 3rd Sea Division captured 20 Spanish ships before, right? Yang Qindong only gave a slight hint, but Gao Xiong immediately understood the meaning behind it. He immediately said, "Sixth young master, you want to arrange them to attack Luzon Island?" "Oh, I understand. Please rest assured, sixth young master. I will prepare it immediately. I promise that no one will know about it. This is our intention." "Good. Commander Gao, this time we have dealt with the Spanish ships. I believe that it won't be long before they send more people. In addition, the Portuguese ships are still wandering in this area. No matter how good the things are, it won't be enough for so many people to share it. What's more, this young master has never thought of sharing with them. Even if one day the conditions permit, we will go out and occupy more places. So the construction of the Navy is not waiting for us. Just one army is not enough. Does the sixth young master mean that he wants to form an army?" Gao Xiong was smart, and he immediately understood the hidden meaning behind those words. Yes. Next, they would need to form another army, but there would be more armies in the future. In the future, when the armies were combined, they would still need to form a division. There was still a long way to go. As for you, you have to be prepared to shoulder the heavy burden. After we take down Luzon Island, we will establish the Navy headquarters. At that time, you will be the first deputy commander. Yang Qindong patted Gao Xiong's shoulder. Gao Xiong was steady, had a strong view of the big picture and was good at commanding. He was someone who could shoulder heavy responsibilities. Hearing this grand plan, Gao Xiong felt his blood boil. He stood at attention and said, "Six, young master, don't worry. I'll go back and prepare immediately. At the same time, there will be a selection of Navy soldiers in Resin City. In fact, we have been doing this kind of work, but because the number of soldiers we need is limited, we didn't do it with great fanfare. But it's not a problem to form an army in a short time." "Very good. At least the candidate for the commander of the Second Army. In the name of the Navy headquarters, let me have a look." Yang Qindong did what he said and put the task of forming the Second Army on the agenda. In Yang Qindong's view, if he wanted to expand his strength, it was not enough to just do it on land. In addition, the Eastern world had been exposed and could face all kinds of unexpected events or even provocations at any time. The expansion of the Navy was also necessary. Gao Xiong left. Only 10 days later, 10 warships with red, yellow, and red rectangular flags sailed on the sea and went straight in the direction of Luzon Island. It seemed that this was just a simple voyage, but no one knew that all the officers and soldiers of the 1st Sea Division were curled up on these 10 ships, giving a very crowded feeling. This time, it was the 1st Sea Division that received the task. This was also Gao Xiong's idea, since the Navy was going to establish a second army. Then, who would be the commander of the 1st Sea Division? As the commander of the 1st Sea Division and the first deputy commander of the Navy headquarters, of course, he had to express his opinion. The commander of the 1st Sea Division, Yu Guang, was one of the first people to follow him. He was also one of the first people to follow the 6th young master. He had the ability and qualifications, so he chose this person as the candidate for the commander of the 2nd Sea Division. This time, the capture of Luzon Island gave him an opportunity to show his face in front of the 6th young master. Yu Guang naturally grasped the opportunity given to him by the army commander. After receiving the order, he and the 4 regiment commanders of the 1st Sea Division, as well as the staff officers, repeatedly studied Luzon Island and formulated what they thought was the most perfect battle plan. When the 10 ships with the Spanish flag arrived at the northernmost dock of Luzon Island on the pretext of trade, the 4th Sea Division was responsible for controlling the port. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Sea Division launched a lightning raid from 3 different directions and soon controlled most of the areas around the Kugel River. The Luzon government, which originally only had 50,000 soldiers and was still spread out for defense, fell in just 5 days. The already declining Governor Chinrong was captured alive, and the entire Luzon Island became a new territory for the mercenaries. On the 2nd day after Luzon changed its flag, a large number of ships with the flag of 5 stars suddenly appeared. They surrounded the 10 ships with the flag of Spain, and after a fierce battle, they destroyed them. The main commander, Miguel, and the deputy commander, Cruz, were captured and then taken away in public. This scene was witnessed by many merchants at the northern port of Luzon. At this point, the plan was successfully completed. Yang Qindong used the 2 captured enemy generals and the 10 ships to act and reasonably occupy Luzon Island. They had defeated the Western powers and returned safely to Luzon Island. When the news spread, even if the Southern and Southern Ming dynasties knew about it, they could not say anything. As for why the mercenaries did not leave and instead sent troops to guard the place, it was easier to explain. After all, this place had become the target of other countries. They only stayed to better protect this place. After Luzon Island became Yang Qindong's new power, they expanded the northern dock according to his request and renamed it Port Luzon. At the same time, a new city, Luzon City, was built on the island. Li Sheng, who was recommended by Yu Qian, was the first city lord. Because the population of Luzon Island was not large at that time, only a little more than 1 million, in order to strengthen the construction here and prosper the economy, 2 million people were transferred from Cambodia. At this point, Yang Qindong had fulfilled his promise to Governor Sun Xiaoguang. After Luzon Island became a member of Yang Qindong's sphere of influence, they had successfully taken control of the Ming dynasty's South China Sea. Relying on Ryukyu Island, Luzon Island, and the docks and harbors of Yunnan Province, they had formed a pocket above the sea. Without their consent, any ships of any power that entered this place might face a heavy blow from three sides. The mission of capturing Luzon Island was successfully completed. The time came to May of 1454 AD. At this time, the second wife, Chao Yin, was about to give birth. Yang Qindong gave up all military affairs and returned to Chinan City to accompany Chao Yin, who was about to give birth, to wait for the birth of his first child. Yang Qindong stopped, and the provinces under his power also settled down. Those that should be developed continued to develop, and those that should be stabilized seized the time to stabilize. The Navy headquarters also passed a resolution to build the Second Sea Army, appointing Yue Guang as the commander. There were 4, 5, and 6 naval divisions under his command, with a total of more than 26,000 officers. At the same time, it was announced that from today onwards, the mercenaries would be renamed the Five-Star Army, and it was announced to the world. The mercenaries changed their name to the Five-Star Army, which was definitely a big deal. However, there were not many people who really paid attention to this at the moment. Everything was following Yang Qindong's attack on the Phnom Penh dynasty. The various forces also took the opportunity to seek opportunities to seize their own benefits. Shortly after learning the news that the mercenaries launched an attack on the Phnom Penh dynasty, the king of Minzhuang, Zhu Huiqiu, proclaimed himself King Nanming and announced to the world. Not long after, he sent troops to Yunnan, where King Mu Bin of Shiping was located. For King Nanming, Zhu Huiqiu, his location was not satisfactory. To the north and east, there was Bai Ming's army. To the west, there was King Mu's army, and to the south, there was the mercenaries' territory of Yunnan province. He was surrounded on all sides, and there was not even a safe way out. Once something happened, wouldn't his life be in danger? In order to solve this problem, he was bound to kill his way out. After thinking about it, he set his target on Yunnan, where King Shiping was located. This was also a last resort. Relatively speaking, among the 3 forces that surrounded him, King Shiping was the easiest to bully. In order to achieve the goal of one hit, Zhu Huiqiu mobilized 100,000 troops and gave a heavy blow to Mu Bin, who was under Yunnan, without warning. Unfortunately, because the news was leaked in advance, he did not achieve the goal of one hit. He only managed to severely injure Mu Bin. However, just as King Nanming wanted to take down the entire Yunnan, Nanming sent troops. For a time, King Nanming, who had to fight on both sides, quickly changed from offense to defense. The battle was in a state of stalemate for a while. At this time, the Vietnamese general under the mercenaries, Hong Jin, led his troops out of Lang Son and watched the 3 sides fight. Hong Jin's appearance not only meant that Yang Qindong behind him was paying attention to this matter, but also that he had to do a very important thing, which was to take care of the people who were injured during and after the war. As long as they were Han people, they would take them in and arrange their lives for them. Compared to the last time when he spent 10 million taels of silver to buy Bai Ming, Yang Qindong did not spend money this time. Instead, he just picked people up. Facts had already proven that every time a piece of land was occupied, a large number of Han people would be needed to occupy it. Although after the last incident, Yang Qindong still had more than 3 million Han people in his hands, compared to the expansion of his forces, this number was clearly not enough. Chapter 932. Restoring the glory of the Han people and bringing them to the top of the world had always been Yang Qindong's life goal that had never changed. In order to achieve this goal, he needed more Han people. He needed to spread them everywhere like seeds. Seeking more Han people to join him in the war was a very good way. The mercenaries began to take in the Han people and arranged for their food, clothing, housing, and transportation. under the arrangement of the two major intelligence agencies. This matter quickly spread throughout the battlefield. For a time, many Han people who had been affected by the war and had no home to return to seem to have found the light. They thought of ways to rush to Langshan from where they originally were. They knew that once they could get there, all the problems in front of them would be solved. Their lives would have hope again, and their lives would be guaranteed. The mercenaries' approach quickly attracted the attention of Emperor Nanming, Prince Nanming, and Prince Shiping, who were fighting. When they saw that they were not spending money to buy people, but relying on the war to recruit people, they naturally disagreed wholeheartedly. They tried their best to stop them, and even maliciously spread some rumors that once they reached Langshan, it would be difficult for them to survive. It was better to continue to stay in their hometown. The three forces actually reached an agreement on this matter, and the impact was naturally not small. Some people who originally did not want to leave their hometown naturally chose to stay. However, when the war continued, the people found that they had land but could not farm. When they had money but could not buy food, the thought of leaving arose. However, due to the uncertainty of the government, they began to use various methods. Some sneaked away. Some spent money to buy passage from the soldiers. In short, they had to leave this place. They had to leave this place where they could lose their lives at any time in the war. As a result, there would be people rushing from all directions to the entrance of Langshan every day. General Hong Jin had prepared a large amount of food and was waiting for them. As long as these people appeared here, they would be safe. It was equivalent to being protected by him. Since Hong Jin was backed by a powerful mercenary group, none of the three forces dared to provoke him. This place had really become a paradise, a safe place far away from the flames of war. For a time, the number of people under Yang Qindong's influence began to slowly increase. Every few days, General Hong Jin would arrange for soldiers to escort these Han people to the seaside wharf in Yunnan province. Naturally, there would be a naval battle waiting for them there. They would be sent to the safest place, Qiqian City. Zhu Qiyu and Zhu Qijin of the Ying sect were truly brothers. The southern Ming Empire had already started the war, and the northern Ming Empire was also preparing for war. Dai Zong issued an edict to change the name of the northern Ming Empire's territory to Liaodong. At the same time, he recruited 100,000 cavalrymen from there for the expedition to the west. At the same time, they also bought war horses in Liaodong. They wanted to build a strong cavalry force to the world. However, the number of war horses in the Liaodong region was limited, and many of them had to be purchased from various forces in the grassland. If one were to talk about who was the strongest in the Mongol Empire and who had the most horses, it would undoubtedly be First City. Shicheng was built by Yang Qindong with a lot of effort. In terms of personal effort, it was far more than Qiqian City. For Qiqian City, he only took out a lot of things from the warehouse and put forward some feasible suggestions. It was far from Shicheng, which was built by him alone. Shicheng was the first Siamese city built by Yang Qindong on the grassland. It had political significance and symbolic significance. It was also the economic and cultural center that he built personally. It was a model city. Not only did it have the largest commercial street in the grassland, but it was also the largest vegetable base, grain foundation, and war horse breeding base in the grassland. As early as when the city was being built, Yang Qindong spent a lot of money to buy a lot of stallions at a high price. He also hired many experienced horse breeders to breed and cultivate the war horses. After 2 years, there were finally results. The number of war horses began to increase, and Shicheng became the largest war horse breeding base in the grassland. In fact, the breeding of war horses was not difficult. As long as there were talents and materials, it could be built. Moreover, the climate of the grassland was suitable for the growth of war horses. However, other people could not do this. It was not that they were not determined enough, but that they did not invest enough. Just like when the Tang Empire was established, because they invested enough, the war horses were quickly cultivated. which led to the defeat of the Turks. Now, with strong financial resources and the existence of the mercenary army, there was no need to worry about anyone targeting them. The scale of the war horse breeding base was getting bigger and bigger, so Bai Ming had no choice but to target them. Naturally, even if Bai Ming had such thoughts, he would not dare to openly snatch it. According to the report of the Xian Mansion's chief soldier, Shi Wanshan, the combat strength of the mercenary army in the first city was very strong. Just the combat strength of a new army was daunting. Not to mention, there were more than 20,000 mercenary cavalry in the North Desert City, which was thousands of miles away from the first city. Once there was danger here, the other party would arrive in less than 3 days. If one wanted to snatch it by force, there would be no other result other than asking for trouble. Since they could not rob them, they could only consider spending money to buy them. However, Bai Ming's money was used on the training of millions of new soldiers and the development of guns and cannons. How much money would they have to buy war horses? Moreover, the price of a good war horse was not cheap. It must be said that there were indeed some talents in northern Ming. Soon, there were ministers who proposed to buy horses on credit. For example, they were willing to use the future expenses of the mercenaries to offset the cost. There were also people who proposed to borrow money from the Yang family bank in northern Ming. Since businessmen could take a loan, why couldn't Bai Ming do it? These suggestions made Zhu Qiyu, who was having a headache, overjoyed. He immediately agreed. On one hand, he arranged for Chief Eunuch Jining to negotiate with the person in charge of the Yang family bank in the capital. On the other hand, he sent an urgent message to Deng Chang, who was guarding Xian City, to go to Shiqing City to negotiate. In short, no matter what method was used, as long as they could get the war horses, it would be a great achievement. In Zhu Qiyu's view, he was the emperor of a country. Whatever he wanted, he would definitely get it. However, in front of the mercenary army, this thought was broken. In short, the mercenary army only recognized money and not people. Deng Chang was naturally rebuffed. City Lord Yu Mian's answer was very simple. Considering that they were all Han people and Yang Qindong was the Duke of Loyalty, they were not outsiders. The war horses could be sold to them, but they had to take out enough money. Otherwise, there was nothing to talk about. The Yang family bank was even simpler. You borrowed 5 million taels of silver from us last year and haven't returned a single cent. How can we lend you money now? This was not in line with the development of business and was not allowed. The two sides that had high hopes were both heavily damaged. This result made Zhu Qiyu very depressed and angry. He felt that he had lost face. However, he did not have the courage of his ancestors and did not have the strength of his ancestors. Facing the mercenary army that was not weaker than them, he could not do anything. At this time, the North Korean envoy came to Bai Ming and came to pay tribute like in the past. All of this happened because of this tribute. In 1338 AD, the Goryeo king sent Li Qingui to attack the new Gandusi region. Li Qingui took the chance to start a coup. In 1392 AD, Li Qingui deposed the Goryeo king and became the king himself. He changed the name of the country to North Korea and set the capital as Hanyang, modern Seoul. The North Korean dynasty promoted Confucianism and rejected Buddhism, adopting the doctrine of the big picture towards the Great Ming, that is, pledging allegiance to the Great Ming. This was one of the reasons why Ming Taizu declared not to conquer the country. North Korea and the Great Ming dynasty were both non-conquering countries, but North Korea had a closer relationship with the Great Ming dynasty. This might be due to their geographical location. Since the establishment of North Korea, every king had to be recognized by the Great Ming dynasty before they could ascend the throne and be regarded as the legitimate ruler. The relationship between the two sides was so good that when North Korea sent an envoy to pay tribute, the Bai Ming emperor would give them face and meet him. This time was no different from the past. Zhu Qiyu still wanted to meet the North Korean envoy as usual. The difference was that the envoy this time was not sent by the sixth king of North Korea, Li Hongwa. Instead, it was a subordinate of Li Hongwa's uncle, Lord Shoyang. At this time, North Korea was going through the Goryeo-jing disaster. The so-called Goryeo-jing disaster happened during the reign of Emperor Dwanzong of North Korea. It was an incident where Emperor Dwanzong's uncle, Lord Shoyang, usurped the throne in a coup. In essence, it was a matter of the North Korean royal family killing each other. The imperial court of the Northern Ming dynasty had also received news from the secret agents of the embroidered uniform guard that they had sent there. However, considering that this was another country's internal affairs and that the Northern Ming dynasty had many headaches, they did not pay much attention to it. Perhaps the Ming imperial court already knew, or perhaps they did not know and did not care. In short, the current situation in North Korea was gradually becoming clear. Li Hongwa's faction had the upper hand. This time, Zhang Linji, who came as a special envoy, was the person Li Hongwa valued the most. Zhang Linji had just been appointed by Li Hongwa before he came to Ming. He was the leader of the North Korean Dynasty's highest administrative organization, the parliamentary government. He was at the first rank and was equivalent to the Prime Minister or Prime Minister of China. Sending such an important minister over was only for one thing. That was, once Li Meng completely defeated Li Hongxian, he would have a legitimate reason to request Northern Ming to make Li Meng the new king. Zhu Qiyu, who was at the banquet, did not care about the North Korean matter. Perhaps in his opinion, it was not a big deal. North Korea was just a small country and did not deserve his attention. However, Zhang Linji, who felt good about himself, did not think this way. When he came, Li Hongwa told him that in order to get Ming support, he could do some things to show their existence. For example, the issue of mercenaries. Chapter 933. During the banquet, seeing that Daizong and Zhu Qiyu were not in high spirits, and even when they were drinking, Zhang Linji asked in a low voice, "Great Emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty, is there something bothering you? Why don't you tell me? Maybe I can help you with some ideas." "You?" Zhu Qiyu raised his head slightly and sneered. He didn't mean to look down on North Korea, but he clearly looked down on North Korea. In his eyes, he never treated North Korea as a dish. If he couldn't solve the problem, what could the other party do? Zhang Linji didn't get angry when he saw Zhu Qiyu's disregard. He knew very well that his identity couldn't enter the other party's eyes. It's just that he came with a mission, so even if he didn't want to talk, he had to. Seeing that Zhu Qiyu didn't intend to speak again, he took the initiative to say, "Great Emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty, I guess that you have a headache because of the war horse." Zhu Qiyu, who didn't care at first, became more focused this time, and when he looked at Zhang Linji, he became more formal. Seeing that he had successfully attracted the other party's attention, Zhang Linji was happy and continued, "If it's because of this matter, I really have a way." Oh, this time, Zhu Qiyu was even more surprised. He didn't expect that a small vassal state's minister would have some knowledge. If it was in the past, maybe he wouldn't care, but now, with a desperate mentality, he nodded and said, "Okay, then let's go to the palace after the banquet." "Thank you, Great Emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty." Zhang Linji nodded happily. He was excited that he had taken the first step, thinking that this time he could get the attention of the Great Ming Dynasty's emperor. Then there would be no twists and turns and problems when Li Ji was conferred the title of king in the future. The banquet seemed to be particularly enthusiastic because of Zhang Linji's unexpected action. Especially the emperor, whose face had been ugly for a long time, seemed to have forgotten his troubles at this moment, and there was a smile on his face. The other ministers didn't know the reason, so they could only make various guesses in their hearts. After the banquet, Zhang Linji was still sent back to the relay station by the carriage. However, the others did not know that he had already gotten off the carriage halfway and was heading straight for the palace. The mercenaries, or rather, the 5-star army, were getting stronger and stronger. Zhu Qiyu felt a strong sense of crisis. Therefore, he didn't dare to trust anyone in a meeting like this. He just let the chief eunuch Jin Ying take care of everything. When he saw Zhang Linji in the palace, Zhu Qiyu's expression had returned to its usual calm. Greetings to the great emperor of the great Ming dynasty. As soon as he entered the side hall, Zhang Linji knelt on the ground with a pious expression. Envoy, there's no need to be so courteous. Why don't you talk about what you discussed with me earlier? Zhu Qiyu stretched out his hand and gestured for them to rise. Thank you, Your Majesty. Zhang Linji slowly got up from the ground and explained his plan. If they want war horses, the best place to get them is naturally in the beginning city. Unfortunately, they have already forgotten who gave them everything they have. There is no land under the heavens. The actions of the 5-star army are indeed rebellious. Okay, Envoy, you don't have to judge these. Let's talk about your plan, Zhu Qiyu said with displeasure. The 5-star army had already disobeyed his orders. This was naturally a provocation to the imperial power. He was not happy, so why would he bother others to talk about it in front of him? After Zhang Linji was reminded of this, his expression showed a bit of nervousness. He knew that he had to get some solid goods after all. Otherwise, he was afraid that the great Ming emperor would drive him away. Your Majesty, although there are many war horses in the beginning city, and they can even be said to be strong, they have a fatal flaw. That is, everything they need must be transported by sea. As long as we can cut off this route, it is equivalent to holding down his weak spot. At that time, won't Your Majesty be in control? Sea route. Listening to this proposal that was not very new, Zhu Qiyu shook his head with a trace of disappointment on his face. Envoy, you are wrong. The leader of the 5-star army is the loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty. Why would I fight with him? Besides, the great Ming dynasty has been forbidden to go to sea for many years. There are no more ships. Your Majesty doesn't have any, but North Korea does. As long as Your Majesty agrees, this matter can be done by us. When the time comes, you can push all the responsibility to us. When the 5-star army agrees to Your Majesty's request, we will remove the blockade. In this way, they can't do anything about it. Zhang Linji said with a complacent look. These words were not said casually. It was the result of a long investigation by the North Korean Navy. Every time, the ships of the 5-star army would pass through their waters. After observation, they found that the other party seemed to be very careless. Every time they only saw transport ships and did not see any escort ships. The number of ships of the 5-star army would not be many at a time, only about 30 ships. This strength was really not in the eyes of the North Korean Navy. If they suddenly attacked, there was a 90% chance that they would sink and cause heavy damage. Once the supply line was cut off by the sea, the position of the 5-star army would be awkward. At this time, Northern Ming was the mediator as one of the great powers of the Celestial Empire. Naturally, they could appear with a condescending attitude and propose some conditions for the exchange. After all, North Korea was a vassal state of Ming. They would listen to them. With just one word, they could restore the sea route. For the sake of the 5-star army on the grassland, they had to pay some price. Zhu Qiyu wanted to think about these things again in his mind. Then, he looked at Zhang Linji with a little more warmth in his eyes. Envoy Zhang, I heard that the situation in North Korea is a little unstable now. Replying to the great emperor of the great Ming dynasty, it's just a small problem. Our king, Li Guo, will be able to solve it soon. Zhang Linji knew that the critical moment had arrived. Okay, wait for the problem over there to be solved. I, Ming, will confer Li Guo as the king of North Korea. Zhu Qiyu spat out, giving the other party a guarantee. This was exactly what Zhang Linji wanted. He immediately knelt on the ground again. Long live the great Ming dynasty's emperor. Ha ha ha, you may rise. Zhu Qiyu said in a good mood. Finally, there was an opportunity to curb the development of the five-star army. Moreover, he didn't have to do anything himself. In other words, if any problems occurred during this period, he could naturally stay out of it. He would definitely agree to something that didn't require him to do anything and could still benefit from. Zhang Linji left happily. The next morning, he hurriedly left Bai Ming's capital and rushed back to North Korea. An operation to repair the sea route of the five-star army's transport ships immediately began preparations. Because only Zhu Qiyu, Chief Eunuch Jining, and Zhang Linji were present during the secret meeting, this matter didn't leak out in Bai Ming, the capital of North Korea, Seoul, also known as Hanyang. In 1392, the Ri family established the Joseon dynasty and moved the capital to Yangzhou in 1394. In order to express his admiration for the Han dynasty, not the Han dynasty, and his determination to serve the Han dynasty wholeheartedly, Ri Chenui wrote a letter to the Hangwu Emperor, Zhu Yuanzhang, requesting that Yangzhou be renamed Seoul. The Guiyu crisis was coming to an end. The power of the sixth king, Ri Hongwa, was being weakened step by step. Ri Hongwa's uncle, Lord Shoyang, had the upper hand. Now, Zhang Linji had rushed back from Bai Ming and brought the support of the Emperor of Bai Ming. The next step was to replace him. Li Hongwa, who had already seized the military and political power, now had the entire Korean navy in his hands. After hearing Zhang Linji's report, he summoned another important minister, Han Mingjin, to discuss the matter of the navy intercepting the five-star army's transport ships. Han Mingjin, born in 1415, was a Korean and was a famous minister in the early years of the Joseon dynasty. He helped Li Hongwa plan the Guiyu crisis and finally seize the throne. He was called Zhang Liang by Li Hongwa. The three of them discussed the important matter in the study. After an hour, Han Mingjin left first. He had become the commander of this operation. Now he had to make many preparations for the sea operation. Seeing him leave in a hurry, Zhang Linji walked out with Li Hongwa. Lord, Han Mingjin doesn't seem to agree with us taking action against the five-star army. You still sent him to command the battle at this time. Will there be any accidents? Wherever there were people, there would be fighting. Korea's territory was not large and its population was not large, but when it came to fighting, it was very experienced, just like Zhang Linji and Han Mingjin. Although they were both Li Hongwa's subordinates, they still disliked each other and fought among themselves. Li Hongwa was a smart person. He naturally saw these things, but he did not say anything to stop it. It was not that he did not have the ability to stop it, but he was happy to see it happen. He needed a balance. This might be a common method used by the emperor to control his subordinates. There won't be any meaning. Mingjin is just worried that the five-star army will take revenge on us. But this time we have Bai Ming's support. How would they dare to act recklessly? Since he has taken on this responsibility, he will naturally do a good job. This time, we just need to wait for good news. Li Hongwa said confidently. Perhaps he was confident in the plan this time, or perhaps he was confident in the Korean Navy. Or perhaps he simply looked down on the five-star army's strength. It was only a force that originated from the great Ming dynasty's duke. Could it really scare him? He really did not know what the Bai Ming emperor was thinking. He couldn't even control a subject. It was no wonder that the great Ming dynasty was divided. Of course, Li Hongwa did not know that he was looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. He also did not know that his stupid arrogance had caused him to provoke an opponent. The entire Korea would be completely destroyed because of his actions. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.